The next several videos are going to talk about web information gathering. So this is going to be important because a lot of the times we're going to be tasked with a web penetration test, or we might encounter a website on an external or internal penetration test. And being able to gather information and perform enumeration on those websites is super important. So what I'm going to show you throughout is how to gather some of the information passively that is out there, and then we'll talk about active methods that actually involve going out to the website and gathering information that way as well. So the first and most important thing, especially when it comes to websites or bug bounty hunting, etc., is that we need to identify what subdomains are out there. And you saw earlier when we were looking at Tesla, it had a scope of something like *tesla.com. This asterisk is a wildcard. This means that anything and everything is open to us in the scope, except it was out of scope in the subdomain range. Now, we can utilize tools to our advantage to discover these subdomains. Why are subdomains important? Well, we might run into something that is like dev.tesla.com. Or we might run into a website that should have never been out there, right? Like the dev or like testsite.tesla.com, for example. Or we might find login forms. Another reason that it's so important is because if you just look at tesla.com, you're limiting yourself to one website where there could be potentially tons of websites on these subdomains. So we really need to hunt these and be certain that we're incorporating everything that we can when we're doing our assessments. So one great tool that I want to point out is a tool called Sublister. Now we need to install that. So let's type in apt install Sublister like this. Okay, and this will just take a second to get it all set up, and we will utilize this tool to get these subdomains. Okay, now that it's set up, all we have to do is type in Sublister, hit tab for autocomplete, hit enter, and it gives you the syntax. We can do a --h for help or -h for help, and all we really need here is a domain. So we can say -d for tesla.com, and it's going to start searching for tesla.com, and don't worry about this error if you get the error. So it's looking through all these different search engines, similar to what the Harvester was doing. But you're going to see that it's going to return quite a bit more. So we see Baidu, Yahoo, Google. It's going to go through all these and try to search. Now, while this is going on, I want to point out another way to do this. So let's go out to the web, and let's go and load up another site called crt.sh. So we say crt.sh like this. It'll load up a website like so. Let me make this a little bigger for you. And we can do the wildcard ourselves. So you see the percentage is a wildcard. So we're just going to say %.tesla.com. Now what we're doing is we're using certificate fingerprinting. Now we're going to go out and look for certificates that have been registered, and it's going to attempt to find those and tell us what's out there. So you can see that we can find energysupport.tesla.com, gridlogic.energy.tesla.com, and we would scroll through these and try to identify all the different ones. Like SSO, single sign-on, that might be interesting. If I could find anything in here that's like vpn.tesla.com or dev.tesla.com, any sort of thing like that, I'm also interested in it. API Toolbox could very well be interesting. sso-dev.tesla.com. So these are the sort of things that we're after. And you see right now that we have different levels to domains. Like here you see that we have our subdomain, but what about a subdomain, like a fourth level of a domain? You see gridlogic.energy.tesla.com. So we can go deeper and deeper when it comes to these domains. And what Sublister is going to be doing right now is it's going to try to find just the subdomain. So it's going to look for third levels. It would not discover this gridlogic.energy.tesla.com without a little bit of finagling and looking through the help to figure out how to do that. So we can come to a site like crt.sh to see if we could find any additional subdomains within this, and we can utilize tools like Sublister as well. So I'm going to let this finish, but in the next video what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you how to improve upon this process with some tools that have been written in Go that I think are fantastic. So I'm going to let this run. We're going to have part 2 of this video where we actually review the results, and then we'll go from there. So I will see you over in the next video. Okay, so we have our results back. In part 1, we went pretty quick. Part 2, I want to talk about the results, what might be interesting here, and then identify some other tools that you can download and use and go play with on your own. So this has identified quite a few things. I mean, there's a big list here, 87 subdomains. And I lied to you when I said that it didn't get fourth levels. I thought there used to be a recursive feature where you'd have to do a -R to get those. Now you don't have to do that. It just picks up fourth levels for you. Now, Sublister is great at finding some of these things. Like if we come through here, there is a dev.tesla.com, and I saw down towards the end that there was some staging 2 here, a dev here, a test. These all look juicy. SSO-dev looks juicy. I might be after something like QA as well, or something like vpn.tesla.com. I want to know where your mail is at. So here's webmail, Xmail, anything here. You could also look through these lists and possibly identify what kind of tools they're using. You might see something like link.tesla.com or zoom.tesla.com. And this really just kind of drives home what they're running on their back end for a lot of things. Now, this isn't the all-inclusive. Sublister is a great tool. Sublister was ahead of its time when it came out, but there are better tools out there. There are tools that incorporate pretty much everything in one go. So you might have cert.sh like this, you might have Sublister included, and the one tool that is really popular, if you go out to Google, type in OWASP AMAS, and this is the go-to tool for a lot of people doing bug bounty hunting. So if we click on the AMAS project here in GitHub, you can download the project and install it per the installation instructions here. So you have an installation guide down in the documentation. The reason I have chosen not to show it in this series is because actually running AMAS takes a long time. But you can configure AMAS to do a lot of things and find a lot more subdomains. So my challenge to you is to get AMAS installed, and on top of that, see how many more subdomains than 87 can you find when you actually run it. So another last thing to point out is if you want to use Sublister and you used it, it was really, really slow, it's always helpful to check the -H on the help. And you can see in here that there is a -T for threads. Always check the help. So we can specify a domain like we did before, do something like -D of tesla.com, and then you can specify threads of like 100 as opposed to maybe 1 thread or 10 threads that was running originally. We give it 100 threads, it's going to go a lot faster. We're going to get a lot more results. You could also do a -V for verbosity here and get your results in real time if you're impatient or you're trying to go out to the web. So there are great tools out there for doing subdomain hunting. And again, subdomain hunting is very, very critical because if we just limited ourselves to tesla.com, look at all the things that we would miss. So we can find out a lot here. Now, not all of these pages are going to be alive also. There's a good possibility that we can go to something like this mfa.dev or -dev.tesla.com and then it won't work. We can give it a go and see. Like, not always do these work. These are what show up in search engines, but it's worth knowing about them. And there are other tools out there such as like, go to Google, such as Tom Nom Nom's HTTP probe like this. Tools like that out there that will probe a list that you give it. You can give it this list into the probe. It'll say, hey, this website's alive. or this website's not alive. And then you can start narrowing down these lists as well. So that is something to think about when you get your wheels spinning. But for now, for information gathering and for the scope of this course, we don't have to worry about it too much. But I do want to point out some other alternatives and ways to do subdomain hunting and then what to look for in subdomain hunting. So that is it for this video. I'm going to catch you over in the next one. Now the next few videos have to deal with web apps as well, but instead of looking at subdomains, we're going to look at what a website is built with. And that's a good indicator here of built with. So let's go out to Google and we're going to just search built with, and we're going to go right to builtwith.com. And let's take a look at what this does. So let's just search tesla.com, for example. We'll do a lookup, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can read it. And what this does is this goes out and it looks at what type of tech Tesla is running. Now it gives all this stuff that it can see: Google Analytics, Salesforce. That's great, but it also tells us the widgets that are running. You can see it is part of Bugcrowd, LogMeIn, Twitter. Okay, it's got these language things here, but what we're really after is what kind of frameworks it might be running on. So it says here that it's running on PHP. It has Adobe Enterprise Cloud. Okay, that's interesting. It's got CDN, the Content Delivery Network. Interesting. It utilizes Stripe. Okay, we can scroll through this. Looks like it might be written in Drupal. That's an indicator there. And this is a big website, so it's got a lot. Look at all the information here. And it might be a lot to track down. So with this, with a big website like this, there's a better way, I think. Now, BuiltWith is a great resource, but I think there's some other stuff out there that might help us a little bit better. So let's go out to Google as well, and let's search for a tool called Wapalyzer, just like this, and we're going to use it for Firefox. So it should pull this up here, and we'll click on the first one and go ahead and just select Add to Firefox. Select Add, and now it will appear. So now we have Wapalyzer. Let's go back to Tesla. And you see this little guy here in the corner. We're going to click on this. We're going to accept it. And now we get a little bit of information as to what's going on. Not as much information as BuiltWith, but I actually like Wapalyzer a lot more because it kind of just gives you an indication right away with what's going on. Now, Wapalyzer is more of an active type of reconnaissance. I only say that, and I don't necessarily believe it, but it's because we do have to interact with the website. Now, we're not doing any type of scanning. We're just going out to the website like a normal user would. And to me, it's still kind of passive because we're not doing anything that would be out of the norm. So here we can see the content management system is running on Drupal. We can see the programming language is running PHP. Those are both identified with BuiltWith as well. Now, why is this important, you're telling me? Well, it's important because if we know that it's running with PHP or Drupal, there might be a vulnerability within those. A lot of times when we have this, let's see if we go to this website, you can see PHP is running, we get a lot of things, and we get version numbers. So look at the Wapalyzer website. You see that it's running on an operating system of Ubuntu. It's got a programming language of PHP. The web server is Nginx with 1.14.0 version number. Okay, it can tell that it's running on Amazon Web Services as a platform. It's got all kinds of information here. It's got the payment processing. It's running Google Analytics. So see the type of information that can come through. A lot of times you'll see things like jQuery and other type of libraries here, and the version numbers as well. Now you take those version numbers and you do enumeration on them, and you try to find any type of vulnerabilities that might happen there. And the more information that we can gather on a client, on a website, whatever it is, the better off we are. So when we're gathering information on Tesla, okay, now we know the content management system is written in Drupal, the programming language PHP. Is that going to lead to an exploit? Maybe, but you don't know where it's going to come up in the future. So this type of information gathering is great. Now, one more thing that we can use. we've got something built into our machine. Let's go out to the terminal and we can take a look at it. So we've got a tool called WhatWeb, just like this, and hit enter on it. And if we look at the syntax, all we need is to specify a target. So we enter the URL, host name, IP address, or Nmap format. So we just say WhatWeb URL. So let's give it a go. We'll say WhatWeb, and we'll just say https tesla.com. And it is a redirect, so it might not pull down everything for us here. So it did pull down an IP address. It gave us a redirect. I don't know if there is a follow redirection option here. But what we'll do is we will just say something instead. We'll say like tesla.com instead of 443 and see if that does anything different. And it didn't. So it does give us some information in here. It's not as pretty of a layout, but it is a tool that is built into Kali Linux for us. So look, we can pull down Drupal 8. We didn't know what kind of Drupal it was running on. Now we know it's Drupal 8. We see that it's running PHP 7.3.7. That's identification too that we didn't have previously. So using more tools to our advantage gives us more information. And we can pull down the headers that it has here, and you see they have different types of headers, which we're not going to get into this quite yet. When we get into the web app portion of this, we'll talk more about headers. But this is just yet another thing that we need to look at, and we pull down the IP address as well. So a little bit more information that we can gather here and just keep going from this. So that is it. Utilize the resources around you to gather information. We could utilize resources that go out and scan a specific web page like this. We can go and utilize a resource such as Wapalyzer that you just visit the web page and you can see what's running on there, or a website like builtwith.com where we just don't even navigate to the website. We just type it in and it does all the work for us. And we can pull down all this information, which is by far the most information out of these three tools. So utilize all the resources available to you, and you will have much advantages when it comes to pen testing and your enumeration skills. So that's it for this video. I'll catch you over in the next one. Another useful tool when it comes to web applications is a tool called Burp Suite. Now, let's go ahead and open up Burp Suite. So we're going to go up to the applications, and in your favorite should exist Burp Suite here. Now, Burp Suite is what we call a web proxy. Now, a web proxy means that it has the capability of intercepting traffic for us, and we're going to see what that looks like. So you're probably going to get this error about this JRE. Don't worry about it. We're just going to say OK. You might get you need to accept this license agreement when you first start. Go ahead and accept that as well. And if you see an update screen, go ahead and just close. So we are on the community edition, so we will have limited features. We'll talk more about those when we get to the web application section, but I just want to introduce you to what Burp Suite can do in a very basic form and how we can actually gather some information out of a website from Burp Suite pretty easily. So let's go ahead and just select temporary project and click next, and then select Start Burp. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our Firefox for utilizing Burp Suite. So go ahead and go to Favorites in Firefox. And I want you to go over to the right-hand little hamburger here, and you're going to go and select Preferences. From Preferences, we're going to scroll down all the way to the bottom, and we're going to select Settings. Now, we're going to select this manual proxy configuration here, and we're going to say 127.0.0.1 on port 8080. Later, when we get to the web application section, I'll show you a much easier way of doing this with a tool called Foxy Proxy, but for right now, this is a very high-level overview. So go ahead and use this proxy server for all protocols, and that should fill in the rest down here. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to leave this open. I'll show you why in a second. So I also want you to go to a new tab, and I want you to go to https://burp, like this. Now, your first page might not show up like this. It might show up with a "you need to accept this certificate." You're just going to say allow down at the bottom and say yes, permanently store this exception. And then you'll be brought to a screen somewhat like this. So what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and just click on CA certificate here and then save the file. Mine is already saved, as you can see in my downloads right here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back into preferences once we have that saved. And we're going to go to privacy and security over on the left-hand side. We're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and there is a view certificates button down here. And then we're going to go ahead and just hit import. Your downloads folder should automatically be selected. If not, select downloads and then just select the cacert.der, hit open, and then it's already installed for me, but you will have two check boxes. Check both of those boxes and select OK, and then it should now be imported for you. So a couple things to note: Firefox sometimes changes things around. I am recording this video in 2019. If you watch it at a later time, just be cognizant that in the General tab, usually towards the bottom is the network settings, and the privacy and security settings usually contain the certificates. So look around for those. Sometimes these move. So from here, let's go ahead and just see what we set up. So I want you to go ahead and try to go to a website. We can try to say tesla.com. And it is going to stall out. What is going on here? So if we go over here, we see this proxy tab is lit up in orange. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And you can see that it's gathering some data here. It's captured some stuff from Firefox. We've got more Firefox. We can just click forward through this if we want. And now we can see Tesla starting to load. And what we're doing is we're intercepting requests that Tesla is making out. This to me looks like a API request or a GeoIP request. So this might be geolocation, looking for a city. So we're just clicking through. All we're doing is capturing all different kinds of traffic, and we can modify this traffic. Say we have this request here. You don't have to know what this is right now, but we've got this GET request. We can make this a POST request and forward that and see what happens. I'm just going to turn the intercept off. I'm going to show you what's going on here. So we can go over to the target, and you can see all the pages that have loaded in here. This is all the traffic that has been intercepted so far since we ran Tesla. So not only is Tesla running, but you can see that it pulls Google Analytics, it pulls this secured visit, which looks like tracking as well. It pulls DoubleClick, which looks like maybe ads, and then it has an API running here as well. So it's gathering all this traffic through, but we're going to dig into just Tesla here. And I just want to click on the first / and see if there's a response to our request. There isn't. Let's go ahead and just look at maybe let's see if we click into one of these, if we get a good response. We don't. Let's refresh one more time on the page, and you might even need to hit enter. Okay, and sometimes it doesn't come through right away, so let's go ahead and just click around. There we go. Do you see all this stuff coming through now? That's more like it. It wasn't picking everything up right away. So what we can do is we can look at some of the things that just came through. Like we just went to the Model 3 page. So let's go ahead and click on this Model 3 and see what it's got for us. So you can see that if we look at the request for this Get Model 3, we made a Get request to Model 3. And what's happened is we say, hey, I want to go out to this page, go ahead and take me there. And then we can view the response as well. Now in the response, we can get so much information. Look at this. We're seeing here that PHP 7.3.7 is running on the back end. We can see a bunch of information here as well, like Drupal 8 is running. We identified that earlier, but we're identifying it again. We could see a lot of other stuff. There's weird things here going on too, like there's a server name sitting in here. Typically on an assessment, this would actually be a finding, a low finding, but it's informational, as this is giving us information on possibly naming structure inside the network. But they also have their own Tesla type header here, so this is very unique for a client. But what the point of the matter is here is that we can intercept a basic request and response and get a lot of information through Burp Suite. We're going to hit home on this really hard when it comes into the scanning and enumeration section and when we get into the web section as well. But for now, I just want you to take away that we've installed Burp Suite and we can go out to a website, and I still define this as not active scanning. There is a feature in Burp Suite that has active scanning that we could actually run, but that is a Burp Suite Pro. So it has a vulnerability scanner built in. You can see up here, upgrade to Burp Suite Professional, automatically find vulnerabilities. I have Burp Suite Pro. It's $400 a year. It is absolutely fantastic, worth the money. One of the few applications that I would recommend anybody buy. But for the course, I'm going to limit it to utilizing Community Edition. I will bring in Pro sometimes just to show you some features, but we're not going to worry about that. So long spiel short, I still feel that we are in step 1 here, even though we are accessing the website. We're not doing anything very actively with scanning. This is all very passive. We're using traffic like a normal user would. So you can see that we can intercept traffic and get a lot of information. Again, tools like Wappalyzer, look, it pulls down the headers for us and it says, hey, it's running PHP 7.3.7. It's running Drupal 8. Where is it getting that from? Well, it's getting it from these responses. So it's pulling a lot of that down for us automatically, but there's a lot of things that we can do when we get into Burp Suite as well. So consider this just a mini introduction into the tool, and then we'll touch back on it over and over again as we go. So this is it for this video. We're going to get into some Google Foo in the next video and talk about social media as well. So I'll see you in the next one. Okay, now on to what is going to be your absolute best friend in your entire life and in your career. Google. Google, everybody. I cannot stress how important it is to be good at Googling. And you don't have to be amazing at it, but there are so many things that people approach me with that you can find on Google in a second. And if you've never seen the Let Me Google That For You, that's a lot of my life when it comes to the questions I get asked. And what makes a really good pen tester or a really good anything, especially in IT, is the ability to Google. So being able to look this stuff up on your own and being able to find your own resources and find solutions to your problems are going to make you a way better pen tester and just way better at your career with troubleshooting and everything else. So I'm done harping. I just wanted to stress how important I think Google is. So I'm going to show you today what's called a little bit of Google Foo. So I'm already out on the interwebs. I'm out to Google, and here we've got Google up, but I want to show you that I just searched for Google search syntax, and the first one, Google search operators, came up. If you go look at this page, this is a really nice list of some things that you can run on Google and will help you out. I'm going to show you just a few things that we can use to search for and how we can start narrowing down some results. So if we go to Google and we just type in something like Tesla, that's going to bring up Tesla here. Okay, we found the main Tesla site, but we're gonna get news articles and we're gonna get all kinds of stuff. Okay, we get the Twitter, and maybe we want this. Maybe we do, but maybe we don't. Maybe we don't want all this mess. Maybe we only want items from Tesla. So we could just say something like site tesla.com, which we've discovered here. And notice I'm not putting in the www because that would limit us to that specific domain. So we have the wwws in here, but you could see that it's starting to pull in something like shop and other items, right? So we can search for tesla.com, and maybe we don't want tesla.com www. Maybe we take out, with the subtract here, maybe we just take out www. And we're going from 600, almost 700,000 results to 131,000 results. And you can see now we're pulling in IR, we're pulling in forms, and we're pulling in shop. And we're getting all these different unique subdomains. So I've showed you sublister, and I've showed you other ways to find subdomains, including the harvester, but you can find subdomains like this as well. And let's say you only want to find things like, IR, then we can just come in and we can say IR dot. Or maybe you don't want www and you don't want IR. You can take those both out and you start finding more, like partners.tesla. Shop again is coming up. So you can start finding different subdomains this way. Pretty good. A couple other things that we could look for. What about file type? We could say file type like this, And we could search for something like, I don't know, DocX. Maybe there's a DocX out there. And there's one DocX. Okay, it's a survey, probably not useful to us. Maybe we can search for PDFs. With a company as big as Tesla, it's probably going to be a lot to search through, but there are 3,300 of these, almost 3,400 of these. So they've got different items here that we can look through. You know, maybe Excel, XS, Excel, right? Actually, that's SX. And you can see if there's any Excel and CSV. So what we're doing here, what's the point of me doing this? Well, the point of me doing this is me looking for potentially sensitive files out there or information. You would be surprised with a little bit of hunting on a domain. Now, granted here that Tesla is a big company, big domain, and it's going to be hard to find some of this information, but you would be very surprised with a little bit of prodding, a little bit of Google Foo and narrowing down the type of results that you can get off of a company. I mean, we can find all kinds of interesting stuff. For an example, just the other day, I found a backup page of an entire website just by doing something like this. Entire website, credentials, source code, everything. And just through a little bit of Google Foo. So again, Google is your absolute best friend. Before you ask anybody a question, no matter how complex, I challenge you to Google it first. Make sure you have done your research and then ask somebody. You know, it's just good to get in that habit, and this is what is going to make or break you, I believe, in your career. So please, please do not ignore the Google machine. It is out there to help you, and it will pay your salary over and over again. So that's it for this video. We've got one more video left in this series or this subset. We're going to talk about a little bit about social media and how we can target that. So I will catch you over in the next video. Okay, so you don't have to follow along in this video. I just kind of want you to start getting the wheels spinning and thinking about other items that we could be looking for when it comes to OSINT. Now, we could look on a website like LinkedIn or like Twitter and find useful information. Now, I was on this website for literally 1 minute. I've logged in, I went to Tesla, and I've already kind of found something, and I want to show you how fast this is. So you come in here and you go to Tesla, the company page here, and I love to click on images. There's always employee photos on images. Now you scroll down a little bit and you can see somebody has recently posted a picture of their internship at Tesla. And what we can do is click on the picture and look for things like badge photos or desk pictures or anything of the sorts. Now, good employees are told to hide their badges from pictures, and you can see they've done a pretty good job. But if you look down here, right down here, it's hard to zoom in, but there is 100% a badge there. Is this a great picture? No, but this is a good example of an easy way to find a badge is utilizing social media. And you can find a lot of stuff very, very, very quickly. So another thing to point out too is that Twitter is a gold mine for these kinds of things. I have found badge pictures, desk pictures, software, all kinds of stuff via Twitter and via LinkedIn. Now, from the non-physical perspective or information gathering perspective for what seems like physical assessments, the other thing to point out is that it's really good to find the people. Like LinkedIn's great. So we can come in here and we can find members, right? And these are all going to say LinkedIn members. I don't have this account is just kind of my peeping account that I just utilize when I want to look and not trigger anything weird when I'm looking at a company. Because if somebody sees me as a person looking at a company, they might say, why is this guy looking at my profile? So you might not get names if you don't have the premium. On some of these, you might say LinkedIn member, but you can also dig some names. Like here's a name, here's a name, here's a name. And you take those names and you remember the formatting from before, right? We had the formatting when we looked at hunter.io and we said, okay, first initial, last name. Well, I might take a first initial, last name here and I'll add that to my list. Now, we could utilize scrapers out there to look through the employee list and pull down all the names and then transfer those names into first initial last name. You could write a script to do that with Python if you want to challenge yourself to do that. I guarantee you there are tools out there to do this. But this is the kind of information that we're after. We're after what kind of credentials can we gather? And this loops all back. This is the wheel spinning here, right? You want email addresses. When we're talking network and we're talking what you're going to be doing with these kind of assessments, you want these email addresses. You want anything that's been a part of a breach credential leak, right? And you just want as much information on the employees as you can gather. When you take all these email addresses, and it says 34,000 employees. When you take 34,000 employees, I would almost bet money on it that one of these employees has a password of something like fall 2019 or winter 2019 exclamation, or something like Tesla 1234 exclamation. People are always the weakest point of an organization, and people will be lazy with their passwords unless you absolutely force them to use long passwords. I do not know Tesla's password policy, but I get in almost every external assessment with a weak password like fall 2019 or winter 2019. So I want you to think about these things. We're not going to go too depth into social media, but have that in your wheelhouse as well. We're just trying to utilize as much resources that are out there in order to use them for our advantage. So there's a lot of tools that I've shown you, and I've given you a lot of the basics, and really that's all you need for information gathering. Google is your best friend. Utilize Google to your full advantage. Utilize social media. People post things all the time that they shouldn't be posting, and just dig deep. Information gathering is one of the most important steps along with scanning and enumeration. Keep repeating that to yourself and you'll be very, very successful as a penetration tester. So that is it for this section. I kind of just wanted to give a brief overview of this and then give you some ideas to get your wheels spinning and really think about it. Again, we're harping on breach credentials mainly. So from here, we're going to move into scanning and enumeration. We're going to start doing our hacking and getting into the real weeds of hacking. And I'm very, very excited about that. And you're going to see some of the stuff that you've seen before when it comes to reconnaissance pop back up. So I'm excited to see this play out through the course and how we're going to utilize it. So that's it for this section. I look forward to seeing you in the scanning and enumeration section. So I will catch you over there.
Welcome to the scanning and enumeration section of this course. It is actually now 2021 when we're recording this, and we're doing some light updating on how we go about starting off this lab in this section. So we're going to be using a vulnerable machine called Kioptrix. If you go to Google, you can type in Kioptrix and find it fairly easy. So you go to Kioptrix like this, Kioptrix. And we're going to be using level 1. I'm showing you the source of where it's coming from, but we're actually going to provide this VM just to avoid any sort of confusion. So Kioptrix level 1 here comes from a website called VulnHub. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So you see VulnHub here. VulnHub is a great website and great resource once you kind of get into hacking and learning about this, where you could come to VulnHub and just download a vulnerable machine, run it on VMware or VirtualBox or however you want, and try to attack it. And you can see they have difficulty easy, intermediate. You can come through here and just have fun playing with vulnerable machines. And that's all Kioptrix is. It's a beginner level vulnerable machine that you can download, install, and run. Now, the download and the install, you can see this is from 2010. Some of the stuff was broken, sometimes a little bit difficult to get running in the original lab. So we're just modifying this a bit to make it easier. What we've done on our end is just hosted a file that will work, that should by default install and run. So if you go to your browser and you just go to tcm-sec.com like this, and you type in /Kioptrix, Kioptrix, pause for a second, make sure you see this, and then you just hit enter. You'll be brought to a Google Drive. Okay, and this Google Drive here should say Kioptrix. You should have an OVF and an OVA file. All you need here is the OVA. And all you'll have to do is just hit download right here, get the download going. I believe this is around 250 megabytes, so it might take a minute. Go ahead, download it, pause, and then come back when you're ready to continue. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to show you how to install this on VMware and on VirtualBox. These are the only two supported methods that we're going to utilize in the course. If you're going and you're using something like VMware Horizon, or you're using a different type of virtualization software, that's fine, but we can't support it if you run into any issues. So we strongly recommend using VMware. If you're using VirtualBox, that's fine as well. But we're going to be doing most of the course in VMware, though it should not matter too much. So here is VMware. I'm going to show you first how to install it here, and then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing in VirtualBox. So all we're going to do is we're going to go to player up here, or we can go to home actually, and we could just say open a virtual machine, and then just go ahead and navigate to the area where you downloaded it. Okay, so here's my file, Kioptrix Level 1. I'm going to say open. I'm going to go ahead and just save this here. So I'm going to say, this is where do you want to save your storage path? I'm saving it here. Call it Kioptrix Level 1, import. The defaults are fine. You might get an error right here. That's okay too. Just hit retry and it should work fine. It's going to take a second to import. While we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and also do the same thing with VirtualBox. So I'm going to get VirtualBox going. And what we'll do here is a similar process. So we'll go to import, and then we'll just select the area for our file. Okay, and mine again is just sitting here on this drive, Kioptrix Level 1.ova. I'll hit next. And then it's going to ask me some questions here. We're just going to hit next on this. We'll go ahead and set these up in a second. So I'm just going to say import, and that'll be fine. All right, so looking at the settings for both of these machines, I'm going to go ahead and drag this over. Here, we can just right click and go to settings. Same thing here, you can right click and go to settings, and we're going to set these up the same. So either way, on 512 megabytes, this is fine. Honestly, if you wanted to kick this down to 256, you could. I would not recommend going any lower than 256, though. Oops, I did not mean to exit that. Though I will say that if you have, I wouldn't go lower than 256. We're just going to be running this in the background. But you don't need to go higher either. So 256 I think is fine. If you want to give it 512, that's fine too, depending on the amount of RAM that you have on your actual machine. So 256 is good. And then here in the network adapter, we're going to switch to NAT. Okay, so make sure you're good there and just hit OK. And that should be it. Same thing here. So if you want to switch the storage, you can, or the amount of RAM allocated, you can. Only big thing here is just going into the network, and you can see that it says NAT network, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so this box is set up just fine. And then all you have to do on these is just hit play. Okay, all you got to do is power it on. You could just say start here, and I could just hit play here, and both will start. All we're going to do is just let this run. So that's all you want to do at this point. You're just going to let it run. You can see I've got both machines booting. You will come to a login screen, and that's when you know that this is ready. Okay, so when you're at the login screen, it'll say, hey, Kioptrix, blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to take it from there, and we're going to figure out how we can get into this machine. Okay, so if you get a screen like this, you can just say do nothing and just let this keep booting. But other than that, once this runs to a login, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video. So you see this, once you're at the login screen, you are good to go. All right, and that is it. So I will catch you over in the next video as we walk through how to find this machine, and then we're going to start scanning it and attacking it and hopefully rooting it. So I'll catch you over in the next video. Hello everybody, and welcome to this section on Nmap. I'm actually recording this in 2020, so the video you're going to see here shortly is from 2019. We've had a little bit of issues with the command that I show, which is netdiscover, on how to find your IP address of the Kioptrix machine to actually begin scanning this machine. So I'm going to show you a couple of alternatives, and then I'm going to let the video play as it was before, and you'll have several options on how to find your Kioptrix machine and hopefully find the IP address. So at this Kioptrix login page, we can cheat just a little bit.
So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give you a login here, and just go ahead and type John as the login. And I'm going to show you the password before I delete it. The password is going to be 2cows2, just like that. TWOCOWS 2 with the T and a C capitalized. So go ahead and type in John and then 2cows2. And you can see we are now logged in as John at Kioptrix. Now, this machine is very, very old, so the typical ifconfig or IPA or any of those do not work on this machine. However, we can do a quick ping, for example, to anything we want. We could say 8.8.8.8. It could be an internal IP address. It doesn't even have to be an IP address that resolves. But we could say ping, and as we ping, I'm going to hit Control-C here. You can see that we see ping from 192.168.4.53. That's my IP address. Now, the IP address you're going to see here in the video shortly is going to change. However, as of right now, the IP address I'm seeing for Kioptrix is 4.53. Now, we also use NetDiscover, but there's actually a cool tool we can utilize as well. Now, if we come into the network, you can see that I have an IP address of 192.168.4.51 for myself. Now, there is a tool built into Kali Linux that is called ARP-Scan, and you could do a syntax of a -L with that. Hit enter, and it's going to pull off an ARP-Scan as well, which is what NetDiscover is doing. What we need to be looking for, and you can see this is kind of my home network, what we need to be looking for is VMware. You can see VMware is sitting here at 192.168.4.53. The only one to be on the lookout for is possibly yourself, which we're at 51. I don't see in this list, it didn't pick us up. So I could see 192.168.4.53. VMware should be the only one that's running, or if you're using VirtualBox or something like that, it should show up here. So kind of identify it either this way, or you can come in and identify it through the Kioptrix login itself. Of course, you can use NetDiscover as shown in the video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go into the video on scanning with Nmap. Okay, so now we have Kioptrix up and running. We need to determine where it actually is, and then we can do a little bit of scanning. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up into our applications and open our terminal. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And we're going to run a tool called NetDiscover. So before we can do that, we need to type in ifconfig and identify your IP address. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this first 3 octets here. And we're going to run NetDiscover. So NetDiscover is going to look like this. We're going to say NetDiscover. We're going to do a -R for range. We're going to paste in this and do a .0/24. So what are we doing? We are going to be using ARP to detect all the machines on the network. So you should be familiar with ARP from the Linux lessons and from the networking lessons. So we're going to attempt to use ARP to address anything on the network, and we're sweeping the entire subnet of /24. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit enter. And in a second here, our machine should start popping up, and it does. So remember, our host was at 139. This host here at 134 is likely our culprit. So you should only have 2 machines in network because we're only running 2. You can ignore .1, .2, and .254. We are only focusing on the one that looks similar to ours, which is 192.168.57.134. So now we know our machine address, we can start attacking it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-C, which is going to kill this session here. And I'm going to hit Control-L to clear my screen. All right, so I'm going to open up a notepad and we'll just store this away for a rainy day. We need to first talk about what we're going to be doing here. So remember before when we ran our TCP three-way handshake, we had something like SYN, SYN-ACK, and ACK, right? And we can just say SYN-ACK kind of like this to combine it. So we've got 3 parts. We've got the part where we reach out to a port and we say, hey port, are you open? And the port says, yeah, I'm open. Let's go ahead and make that connection. And then we go ahead and connect to it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a tool called Nmap. And Nmap stands for Network Mapper. Now what Network Mapper is going to go out and do is it's going to scan for open ports and services. Now this scanning is going to take place and it's going to identify these open ports with something similar to this three-way handshake. So we're just going to modify it a little bit. Now what the process that we're doing is called stealth scanning, and it used to be written out like this. Now it's just done by default, and we'll get to the switches here in a second. Don't worry about that. Just we're going to be running stealth scanning. And now this stealth scanning used to be stealthy, right? That's why they called it stealth scanning, because it used to be undetectable. Nowadays, very detectable. If you run Nmap in a network that has good security, you're going to get picked up. Although, being a pen tester, I would say Nmap probably doesn't get picked up in 80% of the assessments that I run. So don't expect clients to be running good security, but just know that even though it says stealth, it's not stealthy at all. So the stealth scanning, why was it stealthy? Why was it called this? Well, if we go back to the three-way handshake, what the stealth scan does is it does the SYN. It says, hey, I want to connect to you. And the open port, if it's open, will say, yeah, I want to make that connection back with you, friend. And what's going to happen is we're just going to say, you know what? I'm just kidding. I'm going to send over this reset flag. So this RST. Why? Well, that means we don't actually establish a connection. So like when you go out to a website and you go to Google and Google loads, well, guess what? You establish that connection. You establish that three-way handshake. What we're doing is we're going out and we're saying, hey, I want to establish a connection. The port reveals to us that, yes, I am open for connection. And then we're going to say, just kidding, let's not make that connection. Because we never established that connection, then it was technically stealthy. So that's what we're going out and we're doing. We're never making connections to these ports, but this is how we're identifying them as open. So we're going to use a tool, and we're going to use a tool like this. We're going to say Nmap, and we're going to say something along the lines of -T4 -P -A. Now, you have no idea what this means, and I don't expect you to, but I'm going to walk you through these. And what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, Nmap, I have a choice in speed, and that choice in speed can be between a 1 and a 5. 1's really slow and 5's really fast. Now, the default for me has always been 4. Now, I'm teaching you my preference. It's always been 4, okay? And we utilize this, and I think 5. 5's okay, but 5's kind of fast. Maybe you're going to miss something. Maybe it gets caught. The slower, the better in terms of detection, but in the instance that we're going to be running it through this course, we're going to use 4. Anytime you do like a Vulnhub or something like a Hack the Box, which you're going to see here in a few videos, you're going to run T4 just because you're not worried about this detection, you're not worried about anything. So T4 is a speed purpose. Now, -P-. Well, this stands for I want to scan all ports. Okay, we could say something like -P, or we could just have -P left off completely. Now, if we leave off -P completely, it's going to scan what are known as the top 1,000 ports. The top 1,000 ports are your most common ports. So think of like port 80, port 443, 139, 445. All the ports that we covered in the networking section going to show up again here. But there are 65,535 ports out there. We want to scan every single one of those, because what if, for example, there is a service running on port 47,700? Well, that's not a common top 1,000 port. If we don't scan all ports, then we're going to miss that port. And that could be something incredibly valuable to us, right? So I always scan like this, -P-. You can also do things like scan specific ports. You could say like 443, or say you wanted to scan just for web servers. You could do 8443, something like that. Or you can mix in, say you want to scan for DNS as well. You can add in 53, etc. You can scan for specifics, and we're going to get into that in a little bit of a later video on why we might do it this way. But for now, for the beginner lesson, -P-, we're going to scan everything. And lastly, we've got this -A in here. So -A stands for everything. I want to scan all of it. I want you to tell me the version information, the operating system information, anything you can tell me, fingerprinting, etc. Now, this may all be confusing. It's going to make a lot more sense when you see a scan. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new tab. And what I want you to do, let's go ahead and I'm going to blow this up for us. And what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and start running the scan while we wait. So go ahead and copy this here. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our IP address, and that's how it knows what to scan. We're just going to hit enter on that. And now we're scanning. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and I want to run nmap again with the -- help. And I want to talk through some of these settings in here so that you understand fully what we're doing. Now, -- help is always great, as I said before. Man pages are good as well. But let's talk about some things here. So we've got this host discovery section, which we're really not going to use in this course, but this is good for, say, a -n. Say you want to do a ping sweep of the network. Well, you can do a ping scan, right? Where you just sweep an entire subnet, a /24, for example, and see what's up very quick. A -pn, maybe the host isn't acting like it's online, but you know it's there for sure. You can say -pn, and you can say, hey, I want to leave all the hosts or treat all the hosts as if they're online, even if they're not responding to my ping request or anything. So make yourself familiar with this kind of stuff. This is interesting, and we'll cover a lot of this as we go in the course, but just for the first walkthrough while we're scanning, I think this is super important. Now, scan techniques. This -ss, this comes back into play. TCP SYN is what it's called, but it's also known as the stealth scan. There's all these other types of scans. You're not going to need them. There's only maybe one scan out of all these that may be useful, but you're not going to need them through this course, and you'll probably never use anything but the SS and the SU 99% of the time. So for the scope of this course, that's what we're going to focus on. Now, the SS, we talked about connection-oriented protocols. We talked about TCP. Well, guess what? There's also UDP, and there's 65,535 ports over there as well that we have to scan. Now, UDP is a connection-less protocol. So what we're going to do when we scan it, let's go back to this scan. What we're going to do when we scan it is we're going to actually do that SU in here, and I'll copy this syntax and just move it over so it looks a little cleaner. We're going to say something like, we can put it anywhere we want. The order doesn't matter, but we can say something like -SU to scan for UDP. And the one little change that I make here, two changes actually. I take off the -A and I do a -P-. Why do I do a -P, I should say. Why do I do this? I do this because UDP takes forever to scan, absolutely forever to scan. Because it is a connectionless protocol, it does not have that instant response time. So when we scan UDP, typically we scan the top 1,000. That is my recommendation to you, or else you will be sitting here waiting for hours upon hours for a scan to finish. See, now our scan over here is already finished. If I were to run this UDP with the same thing, it will take forever. Going back into this before we get into the scan. You can see here that we can specify -P of port. That's going to be very common for us, but here's where I really want to get into. We're doing a -SV, a -SC, a -O here, all with the -A, okay? So we're probing open ports for service information. We could say -SV, and we could say -SC, or we could pick these, one or the other, or a mixture of some of these. But we can also do script scanning, which we'll get into script scanning here in a little bit as well. But we can do OS detection, where it goes out and it tries to define an operating system, and you're going to see all this with our scan. But when we use -A, it does it all for us. So why not use -A? So you can see it does OS detection, version detection, script scanning, and traceroute. Now, there's one caveat to -A, and we're going to talk about this in another video in a thought process. It is much faster to remove the -A and scan a -P-. Typically, that'll come back much faster. Then what you can do is you can define the open ports. So say there's port 22, port 80. Okay, just go through this. You can specify those ports specifically. You could say -P like we did in the example earlier with 80 and 443, and then do a -A on those. Now that will just scan only these specific ports with all. Instead of going out to every single port and attempting to do all on every single port, it's just a little bit faster. Now, if your wheels are spinning and you're thinking about it, maybe even you can script this, right? You can script something to say, hey, Nmap, I want to take these ports from a basic scan, anything that you pull back, And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run a new scan on it with the -A, only specifying the ports that we found. That gets your wheels spinning. This is where scripting becomes important. If you want an improvement on speed, for me personally, I've never ever done that. I don't think, for me personally, that it's made much of a difference. I just let my scans run as they run, and I work on other things while scans are running. There's plenty of time to do other things while you're doing your scanning. So, and typically, another thing to note is typically we're doing scanning when we're doing our OSINT as well. So if we start up a client assessment, one of the first things I'm going to do is probably kick off a NESA scan or an Nmap scan. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to go look for those breach credentials, or I'm going to look for that juicy information on Google or social media or where I can find it, and utilize that time while this is scanning, or else I'll just be sitting on my hands doing nothing while these wait. So we're going to take this information now and we're going to start reviewing it. So we have here our scan results, and you can see the scan results come back. And the first thing we notice are open ports. That's what we want to look at. We want to look at these open ports, and we want to look at what's running on these open ports. So we see here that what's running on port 22 is SSH. Okay. On top of that, it's got a version here for us. So OpenSSH 2.9 P2. And then we see Apache is running on port 80. We've also got Apache running on port 443. And we've got this RPC bind in 139. Now remember from the networking lesson, these kind of always play together. So we've got SMB open, basically Samba shares. And what we can do is, first step is usually enumeration. Once we see this, we take the scan in, we scroll down a little bit as well, and we can look at some things and see, okay, there's no OS information. I found Linux here 2.4.x, and it's most likely pulling that down from the Apache. It's probably a best guess because it's running Red Hat, that it's running Linux, and taking a stab at it here, or it may have actually determined that from sort of header or some other location. A lot of times, this isn't so sure as it's saying it is here. A lot of times it'll give you a percentage. So the OS is not always definitive as it is here. So we've got the OS, which could be useful for us later when we do enumeration, and you'll see how that comes into play. What I want you to take in right now is that so far we've got a scan result back, and that scan has gone out and it has looked for open ports doing that modified stealth handshake. So it says SYN, SYNAC, reset, RST. Doing that, it's found a few open ports. Now, it is our job to look up the information that we are seeing on these open ports and try to find exploits on them. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to cover in the next video, we're going to go kind of step by step, and I'll talk through the methodology and why I attack certain ports first, what ports those are, how we can enumerate those ports, and then we'll enumerate everything, get all the details down. Once we have all the details down, we're going to move into the section of exploitation. It's going to get really fun, and we'll exploit this machine in multiple ways. So from here, just take apart or take that away from the lesson that you've officially successfully scanned this machine. I encourage you to maybe go back and take notes, or to go back and scan it again. Get the syntax down in your head. Keep typing this out. Remember it. This is the one thing you're probably going to type out more than anything else. And then also go through and look at the different types of options you have there. If there's one that interests you, just run it against the machine. Play around with it. This is your lab time. Make the most of it. So for now, that's it. In the next video, we're going to start enumerating these ports. So I will catch you over in the next video. Let's talk about the scan before we dive into any enumeration. So the scan here, we've got these open ports. We've got 22 with SSH, and we've got 80 and 443, which are hosting websites. And then we've got 139, which has got a file share with Samba on it. And then you've got the 111 and 32.768, which are RPC and related to the SMB. So we need to think about point of attack as an attacker. Now, when I see this scan, I light up with 80 and 443, and I light up with 139, and sometimes you'll see 445 with it as well. I light up from those because those are commonly found with exploits. If we think back about all of the exploits that have been out there for a website, for example, or if we think to Samba or SMB related exploits, just recently, right now it's recording in 2019. In 2017, there was malware that went around called WannaCry, and that was based off of something called Eternal Blue, also known as MS17010. It was a pretty wicked exploit that utilized a flaw in SMB. SMB has been historically bad, and websites have been historically bad. Now, when we see something like port 22 is SSH, and historically, it hasn't really been that bad. Now, we can try attacks against it like brute force attacks, or we can try something like default credentials or root Tor on it, for example. But when we look at it, we can maybe enumerate the version, but there's not usually what we call remote code execution on SSH. Remote code execution being that we can run an exploit against it and get something called a shell back. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the exploitation section. But for now, just know that it's not really common to attack SSH. So when I see SSH open, we can do some things at it. But when we talk about low-hanging fruit, and that's really what we're after as an attacker, we're going to see what's juiciest first and kind of go from there. So you'll develop your own methodology over time, but I'm going to drill into your head, at least my methodology, why I do things, and there will be several videos of walkthrough machines in this course. So you're going to get to see this over and over and over, and I'm just going to explain my methodology repeatedly so that you can get introduced to new tools and new ideas and ways of thinking. So from here, I do want to dive into my first thought process, which is I want to investigate port 80 and 443. I would either here, I would do 8443 or I'd go right after 139. So we'll do 8443 and start working towards those. Now let's go ahead and just do the first step. This is always my first step. If I see a website, I'm just going to go out to the website. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this here. And I'm also going to go into the little hamburger and go to my preferences. And I have not turned off my Burp Suite settings, and it's possible that if you're just following along, you haven't turned it off either. So go ahead and just select Use System Proxy Settings, and we'll just say OK. And now we should be able to navigate to our website. I'll just open up a new tab just in case. We'll do something like this. Good, that worked. And then we'll do the HTTPS version because there's also 443. You might get something saying your connection's not secure. Just go ahead and say advanced and add an exception here. Confirm it, and you'll see this. Okay, so what we have here on both of these is we have a default web page. Now, when we talk about performing a network penetration test or even a web application penetration test, if we see a default web page like this, this is an automatic finding. Now, why is this a finding? Is it exploitable? No, not really, but it tells us a little bit of something about the architecture that's running behind the scenes, and it tells us a little bit about the client's potential hygiene. So if we see this, well, we know that it's running Apache. We know that potentially the box is running Red Hat Linux, and we're just getting ideas of what's going on behind the scenes. More so, if a client is running a default web page, it brings up two questions. One, are there other web directories behind this? So we'll show you something here in a second where we do directory busting and attempt to find a directory. Like say we're looking at this and we don't have anything to click on, but we say, /admin, maybe that directory's there. Okay, are they hosting a website somewhere else that's just not at this IP address on this base? Or maybe they aren't hosting any website and they just left 443 and 80 open for no reason and put this default web page out there. Now, when you think about that, that signals to an attacker poor hygiene. And I'm going to think to myself as an attacker, if a company or a client is willing to just put this out there willy-nilly, what else are they doing? What potential vulnerabilities might they have if they're doing this? So this immediately signals poor hygiene. We would write this up on a test, And I'm going to show you guys my notes once we kind of get towards the end of the enumeration. So make sure you're taking good notes. And we can do that in like a little notepad here and kind of what we're doing. I think this is useful. And then I'll make a nice little keep note, or you can make a cherry tree and make your own notes out of this. And I'll show you what it looks like towards the end of the enumeration. But we can say something like 80443, and then you can put the IP address. And sometimes people like to put notes at like what time they did this. So you could see up here, it's 22:58 or 10:58 p.m. my time. And we could take that and we can just say default web page, and we can say Apache, and we could tell that it's running potentially PHP, and we'll get behind this as well. And we just have these little notes. So we know that we navigated to it, right? At least this is part of the enumeration here. And you don't have to timestamp everything. I'm just giving you that for an example, but we can see that it's running this default web page. So we have a default web page. There's nothing really for us to click on. I mean, we've got like the documentation. We can go to like, it looks like the manual might be here. And this here, we just clicked on a link and it was a bad link. Now this is also what's called information disclosure. So this would be another one to bring up. But we see here that we have an error page. And this error page is saying, hey, it's not found. Now this is typical of what's called a 404. And when you see a 404, you think, okay, it usually redirects you to a page that's like, hey, we can't find this. This is giving us a little bit more information than we should be getting. We're seeing here that we're getting Apache version 1.3.20. So now, if we didn't know already, we do know that we're running Apache 1.3.20. And we got a host name here, Kioptrix.level1. That is a internal information host name, right? So we can get naming convention out of a client. We could potentially know how they are utilizing naming conventions on their internal networks. And we've got some version enumeration or information disclosure. So this would be a screenshot as well that we would take a picture of. And you can also notate that in your notes and say something like, you'd say information disclosure and then you could say something like 404 page, and then you would just have your notes or a screenshot of this. And then that would indicate to you what you can write up on the report and kind of where you found it. So we can click around on this page, or we can do a little bit of what I like to do, which is vulnerability scanning. So I'm going to introduce you to another tool, which is called Nikto. So let's open up a new tab. We can close these two tabs out if you've got extra tabs like I do. And this tool is called Nikto. It's just like this. So Nikto is what is known as a web vulnerability scanner. This is a great tool when you're learning the beginning stuff, when you're practicing against VulnHub, or you're practicing on a CTF or something like a Hack the Box, which I haven't introduced to you yet. But it will help you do vulnerability scanning against a website. The issue is that if the website is running good security, you might run into some issues with that, and it might actually auto block it if it detects Nikto scans. Not always. Very commonly, that's not the case. But if they've got good security or a good web application firewall, it might actually block these scans. So you have to kind of be wary when you use it, and really use your hunch if you think that this client is using a web application firewall or not. And you'll really get a feel for the client just as you gain more practice. And once you're getting in there and you're starting to notice vulnerabilities or not, you'll kind of understand whether or not they're running something like that. So from here, we're just going to say Nikto, and you can always do a -- help, but it's pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is say a -h for host. And then we're just going to say something like HTTPS, and then we'll just paste our address, something like this. And that one did not work. So let's go ahead and try HTTP and see. There we go. For some reason, it's not picking up the SSL on this. So I'm not sure why it's not discovering. But now we can see our scans kicking back. And immediately we can see that it's doing some detections here. It's detecting that the server Apache 1.3.20 is running. It sees this mod SSL with OpenSSL. It's giving us some vulnerabilities back. It's telling us what is missing in terms of protections. Now, these protection headers, if we're doing an external penetration test, not really that important. If we're doing a web app penetration test, these become more important, but we don't have to worry about them right now. So when we come through, we keep looking and we see Apache 1.3.20 appears to be outdated. Okay, mod SSL appears to be outdated. OpenSSL appears to be outdated. These are all findings. Depending on how outdated it is, a 1.3.20 to a 2.4.37 is pretty outdated. So these would be findings that we would notate on a report as well. We can look through and you can see what types of attacks this might be vulnerable to. So one, if you're looking through, there's this Apache here that says remote denial of service. Well, typically denial of service is out of scope when we're doing a pen test, so we're not interested in that. Possible code execution, so maybe interested in that. We are also potentially interested in a overflow and rewrite, and this one says this is vulnerable to a remote buffer overflow, remote being important, which may allow a remote shell. So remote meaning we do not have to be local. So I skipped over this one where you see local. This one is remote, meaning we can run that against a site sitting in our pajamas in our house, and that site's running somewhere else, and we can do this all remotely. So immediately it's found potential vulnerabilities. So we've got this potential mod SSL vulnerability, and it's come down here and it's looking at some other things. You could see that this trace method is active, and we still haven't gotten into web apps, so really don't need to talk about it too much. But trace is potentially vulnerable when you have something like cross-site scripting, which you see up here. And that could lead to something called cross-site tracing, but you kind of need both of those. But again, that's just informational at this point. You don't have to really be taking notes on that. So we're coming through. It does a little bit of directory busting for us. So what that means is it's just going to come through here and it's going to run like a word list, and that word list might have like admin, usage, manual, right? Test.php. It's got all these different items that it found doing this word list. Now we're going to do a little bit of directory busting here in a second. So we'll save this scan and we'll keep this in our notes, and we'll refer back to it here in a little bit. But what we need to know is we can Alt Tab and we can get our text editor, and we could say something about, let's just copy and paste this line here, that potentially this mod SSL is vulnerable. So let's copy that. And we'll put that into our text editor, and we'll make that as a note. So we're still doing enumeration. We're not gonna do any exploitation until we get to the exploitation stage. So what we would do typically is we'll save this out to a file. So you might want to like copy this, all this right here to show what you ran. And if I could copy, that would be really useful. So you copy this and you would just make maybe a directory, and you can call this something like Kioptrix. And then we could cd into Kioptrix, and then you could say gedit nicto.txt. And then you have your Nicto scan saved. So this is part of being a good pen tester, is saving all of your scans and having them available in case you need to go back for notes. So we'll save that. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna pause here. We're gonna call this part 1, and then we'll go into part 2 and talk a little bit more about directory busting and look at some other enumeration features that we have for this. And then we'll start focusing on other ports and really enumerate this box thoroughly before we work on exploitation. So I will catch you over in part 2 of this video, and I'll see you when you get over there. So now we're going to use a tool called dirbuster to do a little bit of directory busting. There are other tools out there that are similar or do the same thing. There are 2 built-in tools, in fact. There's dirbuster, and there's also a tool called dirb, and then there is a tool called gobuster. And you have a lot of options. My option of choice is dirbuster, but I do recommend that you write these down and just explore them for yourself and see which one you like the best. So I'm going to go ahead and run dirbuster, and I'm going to run it like this with the ampersand at the end. And it's going to load up this nice little interface. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, I want to run against this target URL. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this right here. And Alt tab back into it. And syntax is important. It's going to want the port 80 at the end. You see the port 80 here with the slash. And we're going to say, go ahead and go faster on these threads. And then we're going to go ahead and pick a list. So go ahead and go to browse. And let's go ahead and go to your base folder here. Go into your user, your USR folder, your share, which is right here. And then if you start typing word list, it'll bring up word list right here. And then you see dirbuster has its own folder right here. So we're going to select dirbuster. And from here, we can pick a variety of different lists. I like to just use the small list. If I'm not finding anything at all, maybe I'll move up to the medium, and out on the interweb is a large list as well. Well, let's just go ahead and start with small for proof of concept. And so now let's break it down. We've kind of talked about it in the last video, but let's just do a quick reminder. What we're doing is we're going out to web directories and we're using these word lists. And these word lists have hundreds, if not thousands, of different well-known directories. So it could be something like admin or like CGI bin, etc. And it's going to go out and try to navigate to these. It's also going to look for specific file extensions. So we know that we're up against an Apache website. Well, Apache runs PHP. If we were up against something like a Microsoft website, which is IIS, well, those tend to run something called ASP or ASPX. And so this is why enumeration is important as well, because we need to know what's running on the back end to find or make the most use out of it. Now, what we can do with these file extensions, and what I like to do is I like to run it against PHP or whatever the base of the server is. But I also do like to run something like a text file, something like a zip file, and you can make this as long as, or yeah, as many as you want. You could say RAR, PDF, docx, but the more of these that you put in there, the more times it's going to search, because it's going to search through the word list and say the word list has admin in it. It's going to try admin.pdf or admin.zip. So it's important to limit these to what you need. For our sake, I'm just going to go ahead and just use PHP, and we're going to just scan with the default results here and just kind of see what happens. So we'll go ahead and start that, and this will kick off and start scanning, and it's already finding right away. It's finding some stuff. You can see the list getting big, and you can go to this results view where you can see what it's found. And you can also go to this tree view here and see what it's found. You can kind of click in, you can see it's found some potentially interesting files. We can go enumerate these as well. And it's found test.php page. You can right click on these and open in browser. And you can see that it's found this print test here in PHP 4. So we can look through some of these pages. We're going to go ahead and just let that go for now. It's going to take a minute. It could take up to a while to scan, depending on how big your word list is, how many options you choose, and how well your website is cooperating with your scan as well. So from here, I'm going to show you a few more things. So let's go back to our preferences. If you still have that open, go ahead and go back. And let's go ahead and just go to the settings. And we'll go to our manual configuration, and let's boot up Burp Suite. And this is just another proof of concept that Burp Suite is your friend, especially when you're looking at websites. So we're going to utilize it just to take a peek. I just want to see what's out there. So we'll go ahead and just hit next and start Burp Suite here on this. And while we wait, another thing that I need to point out is if this were a website, like a real website, instead of a test page, and a very important thing to do is view the source code. So we can right click in here and we could say view page source, and we can view the source code. Now what we're looking for in source code are any kind of comments, potentially any kind of information disclosures. We might be looking for any sort of keys or password or user accounts or anything that might be disclosed in a source code that should not be disclosed. A lot of times when you do CTFs or you do Hack the Box or VulnHubs, they hide little comments in source code. But in a pen tester point of view, we're looking for more important things like the passwords or keys, etc. So we've got Burp Suite open, and we're just going to go ahead and intercept one request here. And we're going to go ahead and just let this forward. Actually, we'll send this to repeater. I'm going to show you a little trick. Go ahead and send this to repeater. So you right click, send to repeater, and you'll see your repeater tab opens up here. Now the neat thing about repeater is that repeater will show you your response in real time, and you can modify these. So you could say, hey, I want to send this here, or you could say something about like, I want to send a post request maybe, and let that run. And you can see, well, it says, okay, method not allowed. So it doesn't like that. But you can send different results, modify what you see here, and see how that works for us. Now, this is not taking this exactly. So let's forward and see maybe if we're missing anything. And we're not. So another thing that we can do is we can actually copy this. And what we can do is we go into the target here. And we've got the target showing. We could set the scope if we need to. So we can go to scope here and we can just say add and then paste this in here for HTTP, and we could do HTTPS for both. But let's just do HTTP and we'll just say yes. And what this does for us is this limits only searching for in-scope items. So we're going to just limit now, and then we're going to go ahead and look at the response that came back, and you see there's no response here, but there is a 304 not modified. And the interesting thing is look at the server header. The server header is disclosing information to us as well. And we saw this in the Nikto scan. It's all coming back around, right? We saw the Nikto scan say Apache 1.3.20, and it pulled down this server header. This is why it's so useful. And this in itself, a screenshot of this right here, is information disclosure as well. So this client that we're working on has a little bit of information disclosure problems. And we can just say, information disclosure here, and we'll do something, if I could type disclosure here, and we'll say something like server headers disclose version information. And we'll take a screenshot of that and we'll put that in our notes as well. So we're going to get really deep into Burp Suite once we get to the web app section. I just like to get you utilizing it and familiar with it, and just so you're comfortable by the time we get there. We're going to use it a few more times when we talk through network items. And then once we get to the web app, it's going to be a lot of Burp Suite. So we'll get very comfortable with it very quick. So let's take another peek at our Dirbuster and see how that's working. And you could see that it still has 23 minutes. But I really just want to put you through the concept of it. The concept of it here is that we are looking for any sort of interesting directories. And you can see response codes here as well. If you've never seen a response code, just know for now that 200s mean okay, 400s mean there's some sort of error, most typically like a 404 means page not found, and a 300 is typically a redirect, and then there's 500 which are like server errors or other. So what we're going to come in here and do is just kind of peek at these, and we can just kind of open these and see. Icons probably not that interesting. Doc has nothing in it right now. The manual is not going to be that interesting to us. Neither is usage. Maybe usage is interesting. Let's open one of these in the browser, and we can see what's kind of running. And if you have your proxy on, go ahead and turn your intercept off. You see mine caught there. Okay, and now this is an interesting page here. We can see usage statistics, and this might give us a little bit of information disclosure if we're able to access it. At least here, well, we can see a couple things. We see Webalizer version 2.01. So we can copy this and see if there's anything about this here on this machine that maybe is exploitable. So let's add this here as Webalizer version 201, and we'll just put it like on this usage.html. Now, we don't know for sure if this is running out on the web or if this is just an HTML page that has been generated by something else. So Not for certain that it's actually running on this. It could just be something that they have in this usage folder, but it's always good to notate what kind of items they might be using, and they're utilizing this Webalizer for sure, at least in their network. Again, this is probably a little bit of information disclosure or information leakage here. So they've got a consistent problem with that. So let's go ahead and look more at the results, and MRTG is in here, and we can come through here and just look like, what's MRTG? And we can open that in the browser. It says, what is MRTG? It says multi-router traffic grapher. Okay. And we could scroll through this, read the details, and we can keep going through here. And this could very well be a rabbit hole, but this kind of makes sense. And there's a web server here. There's a log file. Let's view the log file. Nothing unique there. Let's view the web server. Let's see if it's the same page. And it's a little bit different, but not entirely different. So it's possible what we're seeing here is that what we talked about in the part 1 of this video, which is that we're seeing the test page is out there. And why was it out there, right? Is it poor hygiene? It's still poor hygiene, even if they're running a web server, but they are running a web server here on the back end. Whether this web server is useful to us or not, really don't know. So the goal through this is to dig, and this is my challenge for you, is to dig kind of through these results that you get back. So wait until your scans finish here and dig through the results. Look at all of these. To me, right now, it doesn't look that interesting, but again, we haven't fully enumerated. The real enumeration would be to go through each and every one of these and determine if there's anything of value here. Is there any sort of service information that could be useful, etc. So where we're at on the web ports at the moment, again, as a recap, we have our scan back, right? And we've seen 80's open and running Apache 1.3.20. We see 443's got the same. We also know about the mod SSL 2.8.4 and OpenSSL 0.9.6b. Doesn't hurt to copy this and put this in our notes too, because I think that's pretty useful. We've got that here. Let's just go ahead and maybe put something up above just as a note. And we ran our Nikto scan and we saved this for our notes. So when we go write a report, we have it ready. And we've got some information here that we've written down as well. So it appears that there are some potential vulnerabilities here, but we won't know until we start digging into Google. Okay. And that will be very, very important. But we're going to get to that when we start getting into the end of this little series here, and then we get in transition into the exploitation part of the series. We'll work on exploiting these. So this is just a few tricks on how you can enumerate websites. And when we're coming through and showing you these ports, and we go over all these ports that we see, we're going to come across new ports when we do pen tests. And what it comes down to is just having a methodology. You might discover a new port, and as long as you have a methodology, that's all you need. So we're going to work on building that methodology, and you might find other tools for searching websites that you like. You might say, hey, I hate your methods, or, these tools just work better for me, and that's absolutely fine as long as you're developing your own methodology. So just start thinking about, when you see a website, what are the basics that you're looking for? When you come across the website, you're looking for service version information, which we have here. You're looking for any sort of maybe backend directories. You're looking for source code. You're looking for potential vulnerability scanning with Nikto, and any sort of information that you can divulge. Same thing, we can come back here. We talked about it before with Wapalizer. You can click on Wapalizer and see a lot of the same things that we saw. It knows the operating system, it knows the web server extensions, and it knows what's running on the back end. So there's a lot of useful information here, and this is all we are after at this point. We just want to scan and enumerate, and then we're going to dig deep and exploit. So that is it for this. We're going to move on to the next port in this section. We'll do a little bit more enumeration, see what else we can uncover. So I will catch you over in the next video. Now that we've taken some time to enumerate web pages on port 80 and 443, we're going to go ahead and shift our focus over to SMB on port 139. So if you are unfamiliar with what SMB is a file share. So think about your work environment. If you go to work and let's say that you have a drive you access, that's not like your common drive, like a C drive. Maybe it's like a Z drive or a G drive, and you access that drive to get files, and you can upload the files, download the files, and then maybe some of your coworkers can also see that file share. And that's why it's called a file share. Another example is, say you have a scans folder and you go to your printer and you scan something and magically it appears in your scans folder on your computer. That's another example of SMB. So SMB is commonly used in work environments and internal environments. So when we see it, we think internal, and we think about all these exploits that I have mentioned in the past, with especially with latest and greatest being MS17010. And even though it's 2 years old, it still shows up. And it's going to show up again in this course later on. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a quick look at our scan and see what we have available to us. So on port 139 here, we see that, okay, NetBIOS, SMB, workgroup, my group, not really a lot of information. We could scroll down, and the great thing about the -A that I had you run with this scan is that it does run scripts for us. So these scripts that we're running go out and do a little bit of enumeration or additional enumeration. And here it came through and it's pulling down some information. We could see that, okay, the NetBIOS name of this is called Kioptrix. Well, we kind of already knew that. And we can see here that it's running SMB version 2. We really don't know that for sure, or what SMB version it's running exactly. So that's really important, because the type of SMB version that's running could potentially lead to an exploit, and we need to know that kind of information. So we're going to look for version information. The other thing is we're going to try to connect to this machine. We're going to see if there's any connections available to us, and if we can make that connection, if we can get to the files on the share and see if there's anything potentially malicious, or that we could do potentially malicious. So let's go ahead and let's get into a terminal. And we're going to load up a tool that you're going to be intimately familiar with by the time this course is over, and that tool is called Metasploit. So to run that tool, just go ahead and type in MSF console like this and hit enter. Now Metasploit is a exploitation framework, and it does a lot more than exploitation. As you can see down here, you can see that it does exploits, what are called auxiliary modules. Now, auxiliary modules is like scanning and enumeration. So we can actually do port scanning. We can do all kinds of information gathering with these auxiliary modules. They're awesome. We're going to go through one right now. There's also these post modules, which do post exploitation. So say we get a shell on a machine, which means we've exploited a machine. We can do some things in post. There's all different types of payloads, which we're going to cover when we get into the exploit section. And then the rest of this, you don't have to worry about that for the scope of this course, but we will be seeing another tool by Metasploit, which is MSF Venom, later in the exploit development section of the course, because we're going to utilize that to build payloads out for our own shells. So what we're going to do for now is we're just going to introduce this slowly. Don't feel overwhelmed. It's just a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to learning all the features that it has available, but it's second nature once you learn it, and it's going to be one of the most commonly used tools that you use as a tester in the field. So we're going to go ahead and just search for SMB here, and I'm going to do this the terrible way. We're just going to search SMB, and you can see that there's 121 results. Now that's going to be quite a pain to sift through. But what we're after, and say we didn't know much, but we're trying to see if, hey, maybe does Metasploit have any kind of modules, I don't know, for SMB enumeration? Well, we know auxiliary modules are enumeration. And we can look right here in the front and see what type of module it is. So you see this is a post module, and you see we could scroll up and we're going through exploits, and then we're going to go up into auxiliary. Now, the second part of this is the type of action it's doing. So you could see auxiliary denial of service, auxiliary fuzzing, auxiliary scanning, gathering, and we're going to utilize this to our advantage. So we're going to take a look at the syntax. Now, what we are after is SMB version information. And if we look kind of through this, we can come down to scanner here and you can see it's looking SMB1, 2, GPP, which we're going to talk about, MS17010, which we've talked about. You have an auxiliary scanner to see if there's anything out there with that vulnerability. And if we look right here on number 60, auxiliary scanner SMB version. Now, this is a bit of a long, convoluted way to do this. Go ahead and copy this, by the way, or memorize your number. I'll give you two options. This is a long way to do it, but I wanted to show you this way of doing it because you're going to get better at it. But, you know, when you see something on a scan result and you don't know a lot about the tool, the best thing that you can do is just say, hey, you know, I know Metasploit does things like this. Let me see if maybe they have any sort of enumeration or exploitation. It never hurts to use a search feature to try to look up items and learn about them. So let's say we've never used this before. We're going to go ahead and just say use, and then we're going to paste this module in here. Your other option is instead of pasting this module, you can put the number that you had. So like, for example, 60, you could say use 60, and it will also load this module. So go ahead and hit enter for that. And you can see here that it says now we're in an auxiliary module of scanner SMB underscore version. So from here, it's always good to type out info and see what info is available. And it just tells you a little bit about the module that you're running. So here you see that this is going to display version information about each system. Perfect. It's an SMB version detection. That's really what we're after right now. So this is great. And we have options here, these basic options. Now you're going to see me do this a lot. You can go right into options by just typing options and just see that instead of printing out all the long stuff if you don't want to. So in our options, we're presented with some items. We've got something called rhost. Now rhost is what stands for remote host. You're also going to see an lhost later on, which stands for local host. Rhost is always the victim. That's who we are attacking. This is the target address. You might see rhost or rhost plural. Rhost means you can only import one host. If we have rhost plural, we can use CIDR notation, meaning that we could put /24 and try to sweep a range, for example. But in this instance, we're only attacking one machine anyway. The rest of these, SMB domain, password, and user, if we knew the domain, password, and user in this instance, we could fill it out and try to get a little bit more information. But we are unauthenticated. We have no credentials at this point, so we're just going to go ahead and just put in rhost, which is required, and not fill out any of the non-required fields here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to say set rhost, and this isn't case sensitive. I just like to type it out case sensitive. And then the IP address of the machine that you're going to scan. So we're going to say 192.168 minus 57.139. And then I'm just going to type in run, give you a second to catch up, and run. Okay, I totally lied. My IP address is 139. The machine I'm after is 134. And run. Your screen should have looked something like this. I'm over here, instead of copying, pasting, trying to memorize. So hopefully you can see that I make mistakes too. So here we are, we see a little bit more information, and it might not look like a lot right now, but knowing this Samba 2.2.1a is very specific, and this is going to help us out quite a bit. So let's just copy this guy, and let's open up that text editor we've had going, and let's just come in here and maybe make some notes, or just put it in here and say something like SMB, and then we can just paste that, and we know the version now. And this is going to become important when we start doing research on what we've found. So we found all these different type of versions running up here, and we're going to do research on exploitations against them. But we're also going to do research on this and exploitations against this. So as much detail as we can get, that's what's important. And what's going to set you apart from other hackers or other people even trying to break into the field is your ability to information gather and your ability to enumerate. If you can do both of those, the exploitation is actually the easy part, in my opinion. So we've got the version information. That's great. We're going to use a new tool now. So go ahead and go File, New Tab. And I'm going to go ahead and show you a tool called SMB Client. Now, SMB client is going to attempt to connect to the file share that's out there. Now, if we have the ability to connect to the file share with anonymous access, what that'll do is we can get in there and we could potentially see files. Now, these files might give us an inkling of what's going on in the network, or they may even be, valuable to us. They might be something like a backup file or password stored in a text file. You never know what you're going to find until you actually look. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is do a -L, and that's going to be to list out the files. And then the syntax looks something like this. You can do 2 backslashes. I like to do 4. It really doesn't matter. And then you just type in the IP address of the machine that you want to try to connect to. So 192.168.57.134 for me, and then 2 more slashes like that. If you're running it with just 2 slashes, you don't have to put any there. So this is just character escaping because we're in Linux. So go ahead and hit enter. And you see that the server does not support extended security. Okay, don't worry about that. Anonymous login successful. Go ahead and hit enter on root password because we don't know it. And you can see that we did list out a file share. So let's go ahead and try to connect a different way. Let's tab up and let's delete this -L. And we see that there's 2 file shares. There is an IPC $, and an admin $. The IPC is not really usually valuable to us, but the admin would be really valuable if we could connect to that. So let's go ahead and just paste that in here and see if we can get that connection. Okay, let's try this, hit enter, and you can see we have wrong password. So it's not going to let us connect to this share with anonymous access. So that's unfortunate. We could also try proof of concept to see if IPC works. Hit enter on that, and you can see now we're actually in this. And this is interesting. So we could say help to see the list of commands, and it's very similar to being inside of a Linux machine now. We can do something like ls to list the files, and we're actually access denied here. So this is what we call a dead end. We can't really access this. So we don't have any information extra gathered. We're going to come back to this time and time again with SMB client. This isn't the last time you're going to see it in the course, but I want you to know that it exists and the reason behind what we're doing here. And this is some of where the information is coming from in our scan. We're trying to connect out. We see the server name's Kioptrix. There's a comment that it's a Samba server, and we're going to try to come in here and connect to a file and maybe get lucky. But this time we didn't get lucky. So we're just going to go ahead and exit out. So that's all you need to know right now for SMB. SMB is an amazing protocol. When I see SMB, I get very happy, but we're going to focus on that very heavily when we get into the internal part, the Active Directory portion of this course, because that's when things get really juicy. Right now, we're just going to keep it simple, stupid on a lot of this stuff. It might feel really easy or very, very straightforward, depending, but I promise this is just going to keep building and building and building until we have a pretty big understanding on this, and there's going to be a lot of repetition and a lot of practice, and I think that's the best way to learn. So from here, I'm going to do a brief enumeration on SSH, how we can do enumeration with SSH, and then we're going to talk other items of enumeration and talk research. What are we doing? We've been collecting all this information and putting it into a text document, and you're probably like, so what? What can we do with it? And that's where things get exciting, and that's how we start to lead into exploitation. But we got to do a little bit more research first before we can get there. So that's it for this video. I'll catch you over in the next video when we are enumerating SSH. So now let's take a look at SSH. So from the original scan, we saw that it was open, and we saw open SSH 2.9 P2. So we're going to copy this and just make a note of that in our notes as well. I think that's important. So we'll just say SSH. We've got the version there. So let's take this and let's do a little bit of enumeration and talk through it. So sometimes you're going to get a scan back, and your scan's not going to have really a version here. It's just going to say SSH. And we can go and try to find that out ourselves, and it's always good to attempt that. What we're going to do is we're going to attempt to connect to SSH to this specific port and see if it gives us any information about what's running. And that's really it. At this point, that's most of the enumeration that we can do. Anything with SSH, the second that we attempt to make a login attempt is going to be exploitation. Even if we just try one password guess, that's exploitation. So we're not going to do that right now. We're going to save that for the exploitation part of the course. But I do want to show you a connection and just something funky with this anyway. So let's go ahead and just go to our terminal. And the typical way to SSH, if you've never done it before, is you just say SSH and I want to SSH to a specific IP address. So this is the IP address I want to SSH to. The issue with this box is old. So when we go to try to SSH to it, it's going to say this, hey, we haven't found a matching key exchange. So they're giving us a few different offers here. We're going to have to type in a little bit of syntax. This is not common, but this is also useful to have in your notes because this does come up occasionally. So we can just say a -O, and we're going to type KEX like this, and then algorithms equals +. And I'll stall for just a second so you can catch up. And then I'm going to copy this one here, and then I'm going to paste it. And you're going to see we're going to get one more error. And this is going to ask about a cipher. So it says there's no cipher found. We're going to do a -C for cipher. We're just going to copy this, and we're going to paste it. And this should now provide the opportunity to connect. It says the authenticity can't be established. We've got an RSA fingerprint. Do you want to connect? We're going to type in yes. Okay. And what's happening here is it's asking us for a password. There's nothing here for us. So I'm going to hit Control-C. Why did we do this? Why did we even attempt to make this connection? Well, sometimes what happens is a banner is exposed, and the banner will say, hey, we're running SSH version XYZ, and this is built by this person, by this company, etc. So here we're looking for a banner. Unfortunately, there was no banner. So that doesn't give us a lot of information, but fortunately for us, when we had our scan here, we were able to pull down at least the OpenSSH 2.9 P2. So that's it. And I told you in the beginning, SSH isn't very exciting because there's not a lot of opportunities for like remote code execution. Really, the way we're going to have to do this is hammer it with brute force, and we'll talk about the reasonings why later. But we'll have to hammer it with brute force and just pray. Spray and pray, as we like to call it sometimes. But for now, that's it for SSH. So we're going to start moving into research, different tools we can use to research vulnerabilities, and additional videos on that. So I'll catch you over in the next video when we start digging into some of what we found. Let's talk now about identifying and researching potential vulnerabilities. So we have our notes here, and all I've done is move them off of Notepad and into Cherry Tree, because Cherry Tree is a bit more visual and bigger font for us on video. And I made two nodes. I made the main node here of notes, and then I made a child node here of vulnerabilities. So if we recall from our notes, we have 80 and 443, and we've identified some findings that we're going to write up on a pen test report. And those findings are, a default web page, 404 page was giving a little bit of information disclosure, and the server headers were disclosing some information as well. On top of that, we've identified some information that we need for research. Now we've got 80 here, and on port 80, we've got this Apache, this mod SSL, and this open SSL that we could research. And when we ran our NICTO scan, we identified something potentially juicy here, where mod SSL 2.8.4 falls in line with this, which is 2.8 and 7 or lower, which we are vulnerable to a remote buffer overflow, which may allow a remote shell. Remote buffer overflow, meaning that we don't have to be local, we can be remote, which we are, and we can gain access via remote shell, meaning we can gain access to that machine. So that's good, that's really good. The other one here we see is SMB, and we identified Samba version 2.2.1a, We also identified a WebAlyzer version 2.01, and we've identified OpenSSH 2.9 P2. So for this video, we're going to target the low-hanging fruit. And I put this in order of how I would attack it. Now, again, I always think 80.443 and 139.445 are the juiciest to me. This WebAlyzer might be juicy. OpenSSH, probably not that juicy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and research 80 and 443, and then we'll research the SMB as well, and then I'll leave you to do a little digging on these just as practice, and we can see where we go. So from here, we're just going to go out and open up Firefox, and we'll go out to Google. And on Google, we can pick and choose which one we want to research here. Now, this mod SSL 2.8.4 is probably the juiciest of the items, and we might want to start there. So let's just say something like mod SSL 2.8.4. You see the 2.8.7 exploit showing up, by the way. We'll just do 2.8.4 exploit, and we'll see what comes up. Now, naughty words. We'll just call it open luck, okay? And you can see, don't cheat, Keyoptrix is coming up as well. But we're gonna go ahead and just open this Apache mod, and then we're gonna also open this GitHub one. And I'll cheat a little bit and tell you why here in a minute. So, Apache mod SSL 2.8.7, less than 2.8.7. Scroll through here, and it just has the code for us. Now, this is where you have a chance to come through and read the code. Now, it looks like to me that they're just identifying, if you've never seen a buffer overflow, which you probably haven't, there will be one later in the course, it's identifying where it's going to have the architecture, right? So the architecture has its own identifier. So depending on, which it looks like this works for quite a bit of different architectures of Linux, depending on which Linux you're running is this return address here. So that's all this is doing. And then there's going to be code down here, I'm guessing, for an overflow, which you see a bunch of A's. As you're going to see later in the course, this is just overflows. So you'll learn to read this over time. Again, like, you do not have to code this. You do not have to be, you don't have to be super good developer, but just understanding kind of what's going on and making sure that the code that you download is safe on your computer and it's good to go. Now, this is coming off Exploit Database, so you can, I wouldn't say assume, but you can trust it for the most part that this is safe code. You have the option here to download the exploit, and you actually have the option to download the vulnerable app as well if you ever want to build out a machine and play on your own. So we have a little bit of information here that it just says, hey, this is less than 2.8.7 OpenSSL, and we've got a remote buffer overflow. There's nothing else here, but that's okay. That's, this might be good for us. This is something that we need to note. So we can copy this, and I would put it here, and we could just say something like 8443 potentially vulnerable to, we'll call it open luck, and then we'll just put it here. And we should also save this open luck, and I'll cheat a little bit and tell you guys why, is because this the exploit database one, without saying bad words, is not going to allow us to work. It's not going to work. The exploit's a little dated, and that's why there is a GitHub one out there that actually does work. So we're going to utilize the GitHub one instead when we do get to the exploitation section. So a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a foreshadowing, we are going to utilize this exploit. So we could also go in and research. We could say Apache HTTPD 1.3.20, copy that, and come to Google and just say, hey, I wonder if there's an exploit for that. And you would just search something like this. And you can see in here, Apache 1.3.20 is actually showing up in this vulnerability as well. So that's good. And then sometimes we see these websites like this CVE details. These are okay to look at. They're all right. Like, you come in here and what you want to look for is the score. Immediately my eyes shift to the score. I don't care about anything else. If I see something that's red, I get excited. but we see no red here. So I don't think that necessarily this is vulnerable to like a remote code execution. It's got a lot of denial of service, but I would want to see like a high score, which means a critical. That's what red is. Red is critical. So we've got high, moderate, and low here, but we don't have a critical one. So this doesn't look like it really probably has anything, but it is tied to this, which is another wheel spinning indicator here that, hey, you know what, we probably got an exploit here with this thing, or at least something that we should try. And that OpenSSL is tied directly to this mod SSL, so we don't really have to research it. Now let's move on to Samba here, Samba 2.2.1a. Let's copy this and let's check for an exploit. So just as simple as doing this and saying exploit. And we've got a few here. We've got this Samba 2.2.8 remote code execution. We've got Samba 2.2.x remote buffer overflow. And we've got one down here, which I love to see. This is Rapid7. So let's go to Rapid7 first. Why do I like to see Rapid7? Well, Rapid7 makes Metasploit. So it looks like this exploit is called Samba trans2 open. And let's read a little bit about the description. So it says, this exploits the buffer overflow found in Samba versions 2.2.0 to 2.2.8. That meets our criteria. This particular module is capable of exploiting the flaw in x86 Linux systems, that's important to know, that do not have the no exec stack option set. Note, some older versions of Red Hat do not seem to be vulnerable since they apparently do not allow anonymous access to IPC. So remember, we did get anonymous access to IPC earlier when we connected to it via our SMB client. We never got access to admin. We could never do anything in IPC. We tried to say LS and it said denied, but we still logged in. So we do have anonymous access to IPC. That's interesting. And we are potentially running against an x86 Linux system. So that's interesting as well. It looks like we're potentially meeting some of the requirements here. Now, here is where this is great. You scroll down here and you see module options. And look, this is Metasploit. It gives you the module options. It says, hey, use exploit Linux Samba trans2 open. And then it tells you, hey, how to do this. And then you're good to go. That's really nice. I really like that. So I'm going to copy this one. And we'll just come to our notes and we'll say something like 139, potentially vulnerable to trans2 open. And we'll just paste a link here. And we can come read these as well. So this is the trans2 open overflow here. This looks like the manual version of the trans2 open overflow. It looks like it is a Perl script. And again, it looks like an overflow. So you'll learn to read these and see what they look like just over time. But you just want to look at the code, make sure everything's good to go. You will need to run this with Perl. It gives you the options here, trans2 root Perl, what option to select, what target type to select, your IP address, and your target IP address. So we'll save this one as well. Why not? And we'll take a look at the other one, just see what it is. And it looks like it could work for us, remote root exploit for Samba 2.2.x that works against all Linux distributions. Samba.c. I think this is a possibility as well. So this is C code here. We're going to go ahead and just copy this. And we'll go ahead and add this to our list as well. And we'll figure it out. So all we're doing right now is the research. Okay, so from here, I've showed you the Google way. Let's say for some reason you want to do this on the fly, you want to use another tool, or you're in a network and the network has no access. You have no internet access out. You have no research capabilities. You can go to the terminal, and there's a great way to research this as well. So let's go back up to our notes and take a peek. Now let's take this Unix Samba 2.2.1a, for example. And let's do a tool called Searchsploit. Now Searchsploit is going to search for the exploit database, this whole database here that we're looking through. It's brought down onto your machine. Every time you update your machine and the database updates, it updates down your machine and all those exploits get downloaded for you already. But you could say search exploit, and maybe we search something like Samba 2.2.1a. Let's see what happens. No results. Well, okay. Why is that? Well, let's delete this. Now, you cannot be too specific with search exploit. The more specific you are, the worse off you are, because search exploit is searching the exact string that you are using. Now, you see that we search Samba, and it's searching for Samba and a 2. Okay, now we can start to see some things here. We see a Linux remote code execution right here, and we're gonna have to look through these. Now, it's not pretty, right? It's not the prettiest, but you see the trans2open does show up. Now, it's not the easiest way. I do prefer Google, but if you're in a pinch or you wanna look at all the different possibilities and see maybe, hey, is there a 2.2 in here? So like, look, Samba 2.2.0 to 2.2.8, OS X, that's not our operating system, but it's called trans2open. And we see that over and over and over again. So maybe the wheels spin again and it says, hey, trans2open, I think that that's potentially what we're looking for here. And then once we get down into the 3s, we know, hey, we've gone too far, this is not our version, etc. We could do the same thing with, let's say, the mod SSL, and we can say something like mod SSL2 if I type search exploit in front of it and do some searching there. And we can see, okay, there's denial of service, not it, 2.8.x, potentially, right? And then mod SSL 2.8.7. And another thing to look at over here, denial of service, remote. Remote is huge. Remote means remote code execution. So learning to read these as well. Exploit, check. Unix, okay, we're running on Linux, check. Remote code execution, check. And Apache mod SSL less than 2.8.7, check. So there's 3 different versions of this, and this is kind of why when I said earlier that, you know, they don't really work. One's been broken, they've rebuilt it. I just like the one off GitHub. So we'll play around with that one in just a little bit. But this is what you're doing. You're either going out to Google with the information that you find, or you're going to search exploit. You're just doing research. So now we've identified a couple potential vulnerabilities, and we can go from there. So what I encourage you to do is just do some research on this Webalizer, do some research on OpenSSH, see what you can find out just for research's sake. Practice with search exploit, practice with Google, and then meet me in the next video. So what I want to do before we get into exploitation, I want to give you a quick sneak peek at what your notes should look like so far, so you can see what good note keeping is. And this is in terms of an assessment, okay? Just in terms of an assessment. And then from there, we're going to practice with some other scanning tools just to get you familiar with other things than using just Nmap. And then finally, we'll move into our exploitation. So I will see you in the next video when we look quickly at our notes. Now looking at our assessment notes so far. So you can make this however you want to make it. Whatever makes sense for you is how you should do this. Now this is just a basic example of how I might take notes on an assessment. Now this is just one machine. You might be scanning against hundreds of machines sometimes, and that's okay. You just make the notes against the machines and what findings you have. So for example here, I've got this machine and it's all under this one tab. And we've got some Nmap results. And then on the Nmap results, we've got the different ports that I found open. I did leave off the RPCs, but we can see our Nmap full results here. We can see, okay, on 22, I found OpenSSH. On 80, here's some interesting items I may have had. You know, again, this is just from our notes. Looks familiar. And then I put in the Nikto scan under here. And on 139, I've got the Samba here. And this is just notes for us. Again, could anonymously connect to IPC with SMB client, but not admin. Your client is never going to see these. So make sure you make good notes for yourself, how you can understand it. And importantly, make sure that if somebody goes through here, they can also understand it, because sometimes somebody else might need to go through your report or through your notes, or somebody might be helping you write your report. And it's important to be clear and concise with what you're doing. Now I've got an exploitation tab here. We have not exploited anything yet, but I do have a findings tab here as well. So we've got a couple findings already. We've got this wonderful default test page, and it's hard to see because I've got it on my screen that's blown up, but you saw it once. And make sure that you have the IP address or the host name in your pictures. That's important. And then information disclosure here with the 404 page, and we've got the server header information disclosure. Now these are both taken in Greenshot, and a couple things to point out just for details. I've got borders added around these, and I've highlighted where exactly the finding is. Okay, so it's best to point out, because if these screenshots are going in a report, it's best to find out and just point out to the client exactly where it is, where they need to be looking. And again, make sure you have your identifier here if you can have it. And then here is a response from the website, and again with the information disclosure. So that's just a quick example of how your notes should start to form and how they should look. And then we'll do another one after the initial exploitation to kind of show how we exploited this machine and how we might take some notes for the client as well. And then you'll get to see this all over again in the sample report when we cover report writing towards the end of the course. So that's it, just a quick lesson just to make sure you're still keeping up with your notes. I'm going to harp on this throughout because it's very, very important. So I will catch you in the next videos, the next little mini chapter on some additional scanning tools, and we'll get right into exploitation. Now it's time to play around with Nessus. So when it comes to Nessus, Nessus is what is called a vulnerability scanner. You're going to use this quite frequently when you work as a penetration tester / ethical hacker. Basically, let's say you're doing an external assessment. Chances are that you're going to use Nessus in that assessment. Probably even right away, you might kick off your scans. Basically, you're going to send out an email saying, hey, scans are about to start. And then you're going to start your scans. And then you're going to let those scans run. And while you let those scans run, they take some time. You're going to go out and do your information gathering, maybe look for those breach credentials, try to find something juicy on the client. Then you'll come back and you'll review your scan results and see if there's anything interesting there. Same thing with internal. The process really doesn't change. We use Nessus quite a bit. So we're going to use Nessus here and just see what it looks like and how we can use it to our advantage. So let's go ahead and just go out to Google, and we're going to Google Nessus download. And we're going to go to downloads right here from Tenable. Actually, we'll download Nessus right here, sorry. And up at the top, we are looking for 64-bit Debian. So it says Ubuntu, but we're just looking for the Debian. So we're gonna go ahead and just click on that and download it. We'll agree, we won't even read it. And we'll save here. And this will take a minute or so to download depending on your connection speed. So if you need to pause, go ahead and pause. Now we're going to open up a terminal, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to CD over to my downloads folder because that's where it is. And then we're going to say dpkg, which is dpackage. And we're going to install with a -i. And we're just going to say Nessus. There we go. Just tab if you have nothing in there. Capital N on the Nessus, and it should autocomplete. And then we'll hit enter. And it's going to grab the package and then start to download it here and install it. And you can see automatically it has been installed. So it says you can start Nessus Scanner by typing /etc init d nessus d start. We're just going to copy that and paste it. And then we're going to navigate to this Kali 443-8834. I cannot talk. And then you're going to see your connection's not secure. We're just going to say advanced, add exception, confirm. And here is Nessus. Now this is going to compile plugins here. So this is going to take some time. Go ahead and let this finish. And when it does, go ahead and say, we're going to download or install Nessus Essentials. Okay, and then you're going to provide it with your name, and you need a valid email for an activation code. All right. Once your activation code has arrived via email, go ahead and just copy paste and then hit continue. And then it's going to ask you for a username. So I'm just going to say H Adams for me, and then I'll just do password 123 because I'm super secure. And I'm not going to save. And then now it's going to take a minute. So just go ahead and pause your video, let this install, go get a drink, go get some coffee, whatever it is that makes you happy. And once your Nessus is installed and you are at a login screen, go ahead and log in and then come back to the video and we'll start from there. Whew, that took forever. All right, so we have loaded Nessus, it's installed, and now we're brought to this blank screen that says My Scans. Why is it blank? Well, it's blank because we haven't made a scan yet. So let's go ahead and go up to New Scan. And let's quickly talk about what we're capable of doing. So this is the free edition of Nessus. This means that we can scan against any private IP address. And we can scan up to 16 of those, I do believe, at one time. So remember back to the networking section of your Class A through Class C. That's what we're capable of scanning here. If you were to try to go out and scan a website or an external host, not going to happen. So we do have a couple options here. We're going to start with this basic network scan, and then we'll talk a little bit about the advanced scan. So let's go ahead and click on this basic network here. And what we can do is we can just type in something like Kioptrix for the name. And then I just always copy this because you need a description. I just like to paste it in the description as well. And then down here, it's going to say, hey, what targets do you want to scan against? Well, we're only going to provide one IP address, and that is the IP of Kioptrix. And then let's go with the tabs here on the side. We've got the schedule tab. Schedule sounds exactly what it sounds like. It's scheduling. So let's say that you are into automation and you're working as a pen tester and it's a Monday morning at 8. Maybe you want to sleep in just a little bit longer. And you say, hey, you know what? I got to email a client. I'll schedule that. Email will go out at 8 o'clock. And then the email is going to say, hey, we're kicking off scans right now. And at 8:01, maybe your scan can kick off and you can schedule that to happen. And then you can wake up a little late. Pro tips there. Also, you can enable scanning for once, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. So if you're in a business, you can do this on a periodic basis and get updated scan results. There's also notifications via SMTP if you have an SMTP server. Most importantly, discovery. So it's going to do port scan of common ports here. I actually like to do port scan of all ports. Again, this is the same thing as like a -P versus a -P-. You see the 1 through 65,535 here where we come down. Just common ports, I'm guessing top 1,000. So let's go down into assessment and we see scan type default. So we can scan default, we can scan for web vulnerabilities, we can scan for all web and all web complex. Let's just scan for known web vulnerabilities. If we go into complex, it's going to take a while. And this just depends on how deep into the scan you want to go. But we're just going to say for now, scan for known web vulnerabilities. And it'll show what it's going to do. It's going to do some page crawling, do some directory traversing, and look for vulnerabilities. Okay, on the report, it's going to say, hey, can we edit scan results? Yes, we can. Should we display hosts that respond to ping, display unreachable hosts? I just leave this as default most of the time. And then on the advanced tab, we have scan type. I just like to say default here. So we'll save this and then we'll go ahead and just launch it. And you'll see the wheel start spinning and now it means we're running, and this is going to take some time. So while this is going on, let's go ahead and hit new scan up here. And let's look at this as well. So we've got the advanced scan and they've got other scans here, which I don't use a lot of, but you might have used them in the past if you're familiar with Nessus, or they've got little one-offs, like they've got this shell shock detection, and it looks like they've got the shadow brokers detection here. So they've got a couple different scans, even a malware scan, but we're gonna go into advanced scan. These are the most common two you'll be using. Same deal here. And when we go into discovery, you see the discovery is a little bit different. So we've got host scanning, and it says, hey, do you want to ping the host? Or maybe you don't want to ping the host. And if we do ping the host, what are we looking for? Are we looking for ARP, TCP, ICMP, or UDP? What do we want to scan? Do we want to scan network printers? If we're doing an internal network assessment, maybe we want to click that. Maybe not, you know? And we can do a different types of scanning here. There's a lot more options, which is what advanced scanning is for. We could do port scanning. You see the SYN scan comes up again, aka stealth scanning. We could do UDP, and even down here it says it's really not possible for UDP to pick up between open and filtered ports. So UDP scanning takes forever, and it's not always reliable. We could do service discovery. I kind of just leave these blank, or leave them as default. And then when we come through assessment, same thing. It just gives us additional options here. So it's always good to click through these. Do we want to brute force any logins? We could use Hydra to do brute forcing if we want. We could test for default accounts on if we could discover like an Oracle database, etc. But this is going to go through and try empty passwords, try login as password, etc. So this just does a little bit more here. We can scan web applications and we can say, hey, we want to use a specific user agent, or we want to crawl from a certain web page. How many pages are we going to crawl? Again, it just gives us more control. So if we come down here, reporting looks the same, and then advanced, we have a little bit of more options here as well. But again, either way, if you use the advanced scan, I would start with the basic scan just as a beginner, and then kind of play around with the advanced scan and see if you can scan against the same host and maybe get back more information. And maybe Keyoptrix is a good one to play with. But let's go ahead and go over to credentials. And now if you had credentials for a machine and you wanted to like log into that machine via SSH or Windows or even SNMP, you could enter in credentials and you could scan a little bit deeper on the machine, but you're likely never going to get that as a pen tester because you usually don't have any access. So let's go back to our scans, and you see now that it's scanning and running. The nice thing is that it does update vulnerabilities as it finds them, and it is finding them. We're actually at 99% right now. So you can click in it and you can see that it's got all different kind of vulnerabilities, and right now they're kind of grouped. So we won't worry about them too much. We're going to ungroup this once it's done. So I tell you what, go ahead and let your scan finish. Once your scan's finished, I'm going to meet you over in the next video, which is going to be part 2, where we're going to look at the scan results, talk about them a little bit, and see what Nessus can do for us. Now on to part 2. Our scan results are done, and we can tell because we've got a nice check mark here that says complete. So we're just going to click into our scan results, and looking at the overview, we can see here that we've got 5 critical, 38 highs, 59 mediums, 10 lows, and 67 informational. So we're going to click on the vulnerabilities here, and let me make this bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a peek at this, and this new version of Nessus actually starts grouping these together. Let's go ahead and hit settings and disable groups, and that'll show us by severity. So look what's coming back up. OpenSSL, unsupported. Let's check it out. 0.9.6b, 1.1.0, and it's saying, according to the banner, the remote server is running OpenSSL. And it doesn't tell us much about it. We'd actually have to do a little bit of research, click into this, see why this is such a bad thing, but this is absolutely out of date. Okay, so if we're making a screenshot here, we're gonna say, hey, this is out of date. We see this installed version. It's recommended to patch to this version. So if you're taking notes, you can go ahead and add that into your notes for your vulnerabilities. This is insufficient patching. Come back through here. It says even OpenSSH has remote privilege escalation. It's got remote overflows. So it looks like you could possibly perform an overflow against SSH. So if you did some research and you were able to find a vulnerability with that, that's cool. And we come through here and you see the Apache has denial of service, cross-site scripting. Again, Apache looks like insufficient patching, and ModSSL shows up, OpenSSL shows up. And I mean, we've just got vulnerability after vulnerability. So we would write a lot of these up, and depending on the assessment and how the assessment was going, depends on the severity that we're going to write up. Now, if we find remote code execution, we get a lot of access to a client, and a client just lights up like a Christmas tree when it comes time to reviewing their scans, then a lot of these, we might report on a lot of these, and we might not report on a lot of the lows or a lot of the mediums. But if we're in the opposite situation where, we aren't finding a lot, but there's still stuff to report, then we might report on like, hey, OpenSSL is, it's out of date. And then we go to the next page and we find a low, and maybe there's like okay, there's something in here that's related to SSL TLS. This one is an unsupported cipher. We might report that as well, just depending on the potential in how many vulnerabilities that there actually are. So as of right now, it looks like this box is pretty critical. But what we also do as penetration testers is we take all the results in front of us, and what we'll do is we'll come in and we'll download this Nessus file. We'll take that Nessus file, and there's tools out there to convert a Nessus file into an Excel document, and it makes it nice and pretty, and we'll hand that over to the client as well. And in the report, it'll say, hey, look, we've covered some of the vulnerabilities. There's no way for us to touch all of them because this is a timed assessment. We focused on the low-hanging fruit. We focused on what we could. So please do go look at your Nessus scan results and all the information that we provide to you because it's super important. So again, if we have a client like this where we're going to have remote code execution, we're going to have a lot of vulnerabilities, then these things just start to stack up. And this is what a Nessus result looks like. You can click into these, you can get more information and possibly even, details on how to exploit it and how to solve it as well. So there's useful links in here a lot of the times, and just they give you information, but you should always go out and verify and never trust your vulnerability scanner. Just because it says, hey, we detected it, you should go out and look and find it. Just like we had that screenshot from before with the Apache service version, we know this exists. We wouldn't provide a screenshot of the output of Nessus. We would go provide a screenshot that says, hey, we actually proved that we know it's there and you're out of date. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're doing with Nessus and why we're using it and how it could be an advantage to us. Sometimes we're so overwhelmed with everything around us that we might miss some vulnerabilities. And it's nice to just have a scanner detect a lot of vulnerabilities just for us. And it gives us something to look through, something to verify, double check, etc. It's just an extra layer of vulnerability assessment for us. It's a friend in the game. So I own 2 programs as a pen tester, 2 programs that I pay for. Nessus license is one, Burp Suite Pro is the other. So that's it for this section. Now we're going to move on to exploitation, really start to get into the fun stuff, talk about some different exploitation techniques you're going to see, and then we'll do a bunch of box walkthroughs and get into exploit development, and it's about to get so fun. This is the fun part of the course. Up until this point, it's just been scanning, enumeration, learning about the process, and it's been 9 hours of course material so far, almost 8 hours of course material, just to get to this point. That's how important I think that information gathering and scanning enumeration are, along with the foundations and the materials. You need to know all that before you can just start exploiting machines. So now we're there. Congratulations, pat yourself on the back. We're almost halfway through the exploitation part of this course. So once we get to the middle of the course capstone, I think it's going to be really fun and exciting. So that's it. End of spiel. I'll see you over in the next section when we start learning exploitation. Before we could start the cool exploitation phase, we have to first define a couple things. So we're going to quickly define different shell types we're going to see, and then we're going to define different types of payloads we're going to see. So let's first start with the shells. The most common shell you're going to see is what is called a reverse shell. Now in this example, it is using a tool called Netcat, which you're going to see here shortly. And a shell, all a shell is access to a machine. So when we say we pop a shell, that means we get access to a machine. Now a reverse shell means that a victim connects to us. Here you see it says target connecting to attack box, and you may get asked this question about shells in an interview. What is a reverse shell? What is a bind shell? So a reverse shell means, again, a victim connects to us. You see that it says target is connecting, attack box is listening. So what's happening here is that on the attack box, you can see that we have Netcat. This is NC, and we're just listening on a port here. LVP means listening verbose port. So we're listening on port 4444. That means on our machine, we're opening up that port when we use Netcat. On this machine, it's going to say, hey, Netcat, I want to connect to this IP address here. I want to connect to it on port 4444. And when I do that, I'm going to establish this bin shell here. So I'm going to execute bin shell, which is a Linux machine. If this was Windows, then it would be command.exe. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, let's connect over here, and this is going to connect. So all we're going to do with the reverse shell is we're going to listen. Now, with the bind shell, a little bit different. We have our attack box and then our target. So with the bind shell, we actually open up a port on the machine, then we connect to it. So we fire off an exploit, that exploit goes in and it opens up a port, and then it's listening for us to connect. When we connect on that specific port to that specific machine with Netcat, then we're gonna go ahead and get that shell, and on this side, it's gonna execute for us that bin sh. Now, if we go back, same thing here. We're going to send some sort of exploit that's going to talk back and say, hey, I want to, when you exploit this, go ahead and just connect to 4444 on this machine. Now, this is going to come together very clearly when we get into our exploit development part here in just a little bit. But all you need to know right now is that a reverse shell means the target connects back to us. A bind shell means we connect to the target. Now, a little bit more about reverse shells. You're going to use reverse shells 95% of the time. There are instances where you're going to use bind shells. Bind shells most likely are going to be on an external assessment. If you think about it, a reverse shell, you're sitting in your home network and you are sitting on a VM, and that VM is using an internal IP address. It's talking out through NAT. It's going through your public IP address and you're attacking a target. Well, how are you going to connect that public IP address of the target back to yourself on an internal IP? You're going to have to set a port forward or a port trigger on your firewall to talk into that specific machine. It's a little bit of extra work. You're opening some stuff up on your side. The other idea is to say, hey, bind shell, why don't I just go ahead and open a port up on that target? I'll NAT my way through on my public IP address and I'll just connect to that port. It doesn't care what IP address you're coming from. You see, it's just listening. So we can come from any IP address and connect to that port on that machine. So this is where bind shells are useful when we have to bypass some sort of firewall, or it just makes sense. Sometimes a reverse shell just doesn't work and we have to use a bind shell anyway. So we have to think about the connection and how it's getting to and from us. Most of the time, especially because you're going to practice a lot in labs and you're going to do internal assessments as well, most of your shells are going to come in the form of reverse shell. However, bind shells do exist and you should know what they are as well. And again, for an interview, you should know the difference. So before we finish here, let's go ahead and take a look at what these look like. And I'm going to log back into my machine. And I've got two things open here. I've got 1 and 2. We're going to play victim and we're going to play target, right? Or attacker. So on the attacker, if we have a reverse shell, we're just going to say netcat, I want to listen. And I like to do NVLP, but you can do LVP as well, VLP, it doesn't matter what order. I just do the NVLP and all fours. So now we're listening on any, on all fours, right? So here we're going to say, on the victim screen, we're going to say, hey, netcat, I want to connect, and this is a self connection, but still, I want to connect to the victim machine, or I want to connect to my attacker from the victim machine, and our attacker's IP address is 139. They've got 4444 open. Let's establish that connection, and we're going to offer them bin bash when we do. And here's that connection. So this is a reverse shell. We were listening as the attacker, and then the victim connected to us, and then we could say something like, who am I? And you could see root, and then host name, Kali, and we have a connection, and we offered up that bin bash here, so that works. So that is an example of a reverse shell. So I'm gonna control C this connection, kill it, it dies over here. Now, let's say we wanted to flip the script and we want a bind shell. Well, now, guess who needs to be listening? Now in this instance, we're gonna be listening and we're gonna be offering up the bin bash because we are the victim. Okay, so we still have to offer up whatever command line we are going to have here. Now, all we have to do as the attacker is connect to our victim, and we have the same connection. You see the connection happens here. Who am I? Root, hostname, Kali. So that is the difference between a bind shell and a reverse shell. Remember, reverse shells are most commonly used, but bind shells are important. Again, just to hammer it home, reverse shell means a victim connects to us. Bind shell means we connect to a victim. So I'll catch you over in the next video when we talk about staged versus non-staged payloads. Now let's talk about staged versus non-staged payloads. And before we do that, we must talk about a payload. So a payload is what we're going to run as an exploit. And when we run that exploit, it's called a payload. We use different types of payloads depending on what it is. So you might see a Windows type payload or a Linux type payload, or as you see on the screen, Meterpreter type payload. There's Python. There's all different types. There's like 500 and something that we saw in Metasploit alone. And these payloads are what we use to send to a victim and attempt to get a shell on the machine. Now, it's going to make more sense as we go. It's okay if you're still a little bit confused on all of this. There are two main types of payloads that we need to pay attention to. There is what we call non-staged and what we call staged. Now, a non-staged payload sends the exploit shellcode all at once, where a staged payload sends it in stages. The non-staged payload is larger in size, and it doesn't always work, where the staged payload can actually be less stable. So each has its con. And we have an example of it, and this is really what I want to point out, is we have this non-staged payload and we have a staged payload. And do you see the one difference between the two? All it is a /. So when we see these and we're using something like Metasploit and we have to pick out a payload, if we see something like Meterpreter_reverse_TCP, this identifies that this is a non-staged payload. We can ignore the windows here. But here where we see Meterpreter/reverse_TCP, this means we have a staged payload. What's happening? It's saying, hey, stage 1, stage 2. What's happening here? It's saying, hey, let's send this all at once. So this is going to become very important very quick, as we will attempt an exploit here very soon and it's not going to work. And then we're going to change the payload and it's going to work beautifully. So understand that what the takeaway is, if you have a payload that does not work, maybe try the other type of that payload. If you see something like reverse TCP, which is a reverse shell, by the way, over a TCP connection, if you say, hey, I'm going to send this staged reverse TCP, it's not working. All right, let me try to send a non-staged reverse TCP. Okay, that's not working, but I'm sure my exploit's right. So maybe I send a bind shell instead of a reverse shell here, and I'll send a bind shell staged and then non-staged. And we just keep trying until we find a payload that works. Not every payload is the right payload, and we have to find the one that works for us. So the takeaways, remember the /, remember the slight differences between non-stage and stage, and remember, if your payload fails but you think it's the right exploit, maybe change your payload. So we'll see that here very shortly as we start to get into exploitation in the next few videos. Whew, I am excited. And let me tell you how excited I am. This is not the first time I've recorded this video. This is actually the second time recording this video, because the first time I forgot to hit the record button. So now it's blinking red right in front of me, guaranteed recording. And I'm still as excited. Even the second time walking through this, I'm still as excited, because this is what we've been building up for. This is everything we've been doing. The scanning, the enumeration, even the Linux and the Python. This is all building up to this. And now we're ready to exploit. We're going to get our first shell. We're going to pop our first shell today. And I am so excited for both of us. So what we're going to do is we're going to run Metasploit for this one. And Metasploit's a little bit automated, but that's okay. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and cover it manually. So what we're going to do is we're going to attack SMB here. And with SMB, what we're going to do is, if you don't remember, search exploit Samba 2.2. We found Samba 2.2.1a. We searched around, we went out to the interwebs, we did search exploit, and we kept seeing this trans to open show up. Like here, and here, 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 all down here, right? Repeatedly. And it meets the criteria, everything seems to make sense. It had that IPC anonymous connection as well. So I think this is a winner. And we're gonna go ahead and give it a try. So I'm gonna copy this and we're just gonna go ahead and type in MSF console and load up Metasploit. Once Metasploit loads, we're gonna go ahead and just search for this guy and see if we can't find it. Now we know it exists because we did find that handy dandy Rapid7 website that said it did. So we're gonna search it here. And we're given 4 options. Now, these are all operating systems here, but we have been good enumerators and good investigators, researchers, information gatherers, etc. We could have willy-nilly just saw 139, said, hey, I'm going to try to find exploits against it, and never looked at any other ports, but that's not us. We went out to port 80, we saw that it was running Red Hat, we discovered Linux on the machine, so we know we're going to pick the Linux module. So we're going to say use 1 as that corresponds to this module here. And then we're going to type in options. And all we have to do is set a rhost. So remember, rhost stands for remote host or the victim that we're attacking. So we're going to say set rhost and 192.168.57134. And we're going to say options one more time, make sure that that actually set in there, and it did. Now, one thing I like to do is type in show targets. Now, there are no targets here, but as you're going to see later on in the course, there are often targets that we have to pick from. Not always is the first choice that's auto-selected right for us, but in this instance, there's only one choice, so it's the right choice. So now we have 2 options. Both are going to do the same thing for us. We can type in run. Or we could type in exploit if we want to be cool. I want to be cool. Let's type in exploit. So we're going to run this and it's going to start this brute force attack here and it's going to start opening shells and closing shells. What is going on? So let's Control C. If yours is doing this, go ahead and Control C, interrupt this. Let's talk about what's happening. So you see it's trying this brute force attack. It's trying different return addresses here, and finally it lands on one that works and it says, hey, I'm going to send this stage. This is always a good sign, by the way, sending the stage. Then it says, hey, I've got this Meterpreter session open because our payload has worked, and then this Meterpreter session closed. Reason died. That's not good. So it keeps going through over and over and over and over, and it's just dying. What is going on? Well, we've talked about this. Let's go into options again. Now, you don't see this the first time you do it, but you see it the second time because Metasploit says, hey, if your payload's not working, maybe the payload's the issue. And I'm going to give you payload options this time around. Now we see payload options here in the middle. That wasn't there before. We can see that we're running Linux x86 Meterpreter /reverse_TCP. What does that mean? Well, that means that we are running a staged payload. Couple other things to note while we're in here. We see lhost. That is the opposite of rhost. Lhost is us. We are the listening host. So we sit here and we have our IP address. Sometimes this auto selects correctly, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it did. And then we have the L port, which is by default all 4s. So that's fine for now. It's fine for these lessons. When you get into actually running this in the wild, all 4s is probably going to get you picked up pretty quick because this is a default Meterpreter port. So if some connection sees or some antivirus or detection software sees 4444 open up, this is going to trigger an alarm here. But anyway, for this course, you're not going to need to worry about it too much. Right now, we're going to go ahead and set a payload. We're going to say set payload. And how do we know what payload to pick? Let's just start typing out Linux and hit tab. And it auto tabs out the x86 part for us. And then let's just hit double tab. All right, now with double tab, that's great. Look at the payload options we have. We got a bunch. Now, we've got a bunch of interpreters, but unfortunately, they're all staged payloads here. I love a good interpreter shell, and you guys will understand why as we move forward. But as of right now, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to use one. If we come over to this right column here, you can see that we've got other shells as well. And we come down, and finally down here, we've got a few options that are non-staged. So let's go ahead and try this shell reverse underscore TCP right here. And you can just start typing that out. And that should auto tab complete for you. Go ahead and hit enter. Hit options one more time to make sure that this actually works. You can see here that it actually picked up. And now let's go ahead and try to run this. And let's see if it happens. Fingers crossed. Hey, look at that. So we've got a shell now. And it says command shell session open 5. Let's try, who am I? Root, hostname, Kioptrix level 1. We have successfully rooted this machine. Root is the commander of the system. We cannot go any deeper than this. We own this machine. Hands down, it's our machine. So congratulations. You have made it this far. This is your first rooted machine. You should be very proud. Pat yourself on the back. You're awesome. So from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to focus on port 80 and 443 and how we can exploit those manually. And then we'll move on to some other exploitation techniques. But for now, congratulate yourself. You have your first shell. I'm very excited for you. So I'll catch you over in the next video as we start some manual exploitation. So we have gained root with Metasploit, but now we need to gain root with some manual exploitation. So remember earlier we discovered that we had an exploit with our mod SSL, and we're going to see what we could do about it. So we went to Google and we researched mod SSL and we came up with something called OpenLuck, if you remember that. So we clicked on this OpenLuck here, and this is the same as the one that is out there on Exploit Database, but it is fixed. So remember the Exploit Database one is broken, so we'd rather use this one that is fixed. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow the instructions here. And this is very well laid out. So it tells you to git clone this, we need to do an install of an SSL dev library, we need to compile and then run the exploit. So very, very straightforward. We're going to go ahead and do exactly what it says. And let's go ahead and just copy this first line here. And I'm going to just make this a little smaller, go into a terminal. And I actually have a folder for Kioptrix. I'm going to cd into it. And then we're going to go ahead and just paste that line. And it will git clone everything. If we ls, now we see that it is there. So let's cd into that folder, the bad word folder, and we'll ls. And now you can see that there is just the C file here in the README. So what we're going to do is we need to install this libssl dev. So we're going to say apt install and then libssl-dev like this, hit enter, and then just hit enter because it says yes already. This will take just a second to install. And then once it does this, we're going to use a tool, looks like, called GCC, which GCC is a compiler. So if you've never used C or are familiar with C, we have a C file, but this isn't ready to use. We have to compile that C file in order to actually use it. So that's what we're doing here, is we're downloading a little bit of stuff to actually be able to compile that. GCC is built in, and we just needed some other things additionally. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say GCC, and typically you say -o for the output, so we can call it whatever we want. We'll just call this open, and then we'll just specify the file. You can start typing it and then tab out. And then it says this lcrypto, which is important. Hit enter, okay, and then hit ls. And you see now in pretty green lighting up and saying, hey, we're executable. We have our executable, right? We have our script that we can run. So we could say ./open and run it. And you can see in here all the different options that this runs against. So you remember when it was brute forcing, the last one when we saw the trans to open was kind of doing a brute force. In theory, this is what it could do as well, but here we actually have to pick a return address based on our machine. So we're going to look at the usage. I always like to do the application without any usage to see what the usage is. And we need to use target box, which is one of these down here. We need to select a port. Maybe it says for SSL connection. We're not going to be using an SSL connection, so don't worry about that. And then a -C number. And it says use range 40 to 50 if you don't know. So our syntax is going to look something like ./open, one of these offsets that we're going to pick. And then it's going to be a -C, probably 40, with the box IP address in between. So how do we find what we're looking for? Well, I'm going to cheat just a little bit and tell you guys to scroll down, 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 down. And if we look at 6B here, remember, we were up against Apache 1.3.20. See, enumeration comes into play big time. So Apache 1.3.20. Now there are two we can run against. I'm picking this one. I believe it's the more stable one. So we could pick either one, but I would choose B. I think A doesn't work all the time. So let's choose B here. And Apache 1.3.20 is the indicator. And again, Red Hat Linux, so that's another indicator. So let's copy this so we don't forget it. And we're just going to scroll down and we're going to say, hey, ./open, and we're going to paste that 0x6b. And then we're going to run this against the IP address because it said box was next. So 134. And then remember we had to give a -C of 40. So that is the syntax. Sometimes you have to follow along, and it's I don't think most of them are as confusing as this. I wouldn't even say this is confusing. I would just say it's pretty lengthy for a exploit because you have to go through all the different offsets here to find the offset and actually fire this off. But you know, you have the opportunity here to actually be able to read usage and just understand your way through it. So once you get this little syntax and all this part down, it's really not that bad. So to check off the list, we've got the target, we've got the box IP address. We don't need the port because we're not running against SSL. We're just going to run this against port 80, and then we're going to run -C of 40. So let's go ahead and try to fire that off and see what happens here. And this may just take a second. Okay, it says it's spawning a shell. Now we wait for the SUID. Let's scroll up just a little bit while we're waiting here to see. So it looks like it sent the shell code and it spawned a shell. It says, hey, we have no job control in this shell. And then it has a shell here, bash 2.05. That is a shell. And then it's going in and it's doing some wgets. Now, if this is able to get out to the internet, it's going to go ahead and try to do wgets against these. It's going to keep downloading and it's going to get the response here. Okay. And now it says we wait for the shell because it saved this .c file here. And let's see if maybe we already have a shell. Who am I? Root. Look at that. So it looks like it downloaded something and allowed us to maybe privilege escalate here. And let's say host name. Okay. So we've gone through and we've rooted this machine with Metasploit, and now we've gone through and rooted this machine with the manually downloaded exploit. So there's two options. You're going to find out that Metasploit is a more robust and popular option, especially as a penetration tester. Now, there is a common misconception or thought process put out there by certifications. The OSCP, for example, doesn't let you use a lot of Metasploit, only one instance of Metasploit on their exam. So everybody thinks, man, I really shouldn't use Metasploit. But you're going to see in this course how useful it really is and how robust it is. And if you talk to a penetration tester, they're going to use the best tools available to them. The certifications out there that do that are just making it harder to pass the exam intentionally than they are, for practicality. This course is all about practicality. So from here, now that we've exploited it manually, let's talk about a couple things that we look for in post. So post being post exploitation, and we're going to cover this over and over and over again. We're not going to get into it fully right now. I just want to give you an idea as to the thought process. So the first thing to think about is, what is our IP address? We could say ifconfig if it'll allow us to. It depends on what kind of shell we're in. And see, this one is a weird shell. We could try IPA. It's still not going to be found. If we try some commands like arp or route, I doubt they're going to be found right now either. But we want to look at like the routing table, the arp table. We want to see if this machine is what's called dual homed. And you're going to learn more about that when we get into the pivoting. But if this has like two NICs, and we're on one network and the NIC is on a second network that we never saw before, then maybe we can do something called pivoting and move into that new network. But we would be able to identify who the machine's talking to with an ARP table or a route. We could also look at like sudo privileges. So we could say something like sudo-l, but we're root, so we can run as everybody. So if a sudo user, as we talked about in Linux lessons, sudo user is able to run commands as elevated, but here as root, we're obviously already elevated. So other things that we can do, we can cat what's called the etc password file. Now this is very misleading because the etc password file used to be the password file. Now it just holds a placeholder. So you could see all the users that are on this computer, root being this one. There's a lot of built-in users here. But if you always scroll down to the bottom and you start at the 500s, that's where your users start. So there's actually two users on this computer as well. One's named John, the other's named Harold. So we look at these users and we say, okay, well, there's no password in this password file, but there used to be. Back in the day, there used to be. That's why they call it this. And now they moved it to this placeholder of an X. And what we can do is we can come in here and we can say, hey, cat etc shadow. And now you see the hashes are in here. So these hashes are what the X is placeholding for. We can actually combine both of these files with the tool and go offline and try to crack these. We'll work on that later on in the course. But just for now, like getting your wheels spinning on as to what we can do with root level access. We need to start enumerating again, looking at files on the computer, seeing what's out there and what we can do with it. But we'll get into post-exploitation techniques and thought process as we go through the Active Directory portion of the course, because I think it plays hand in hand. And we could talk about password cracking there and how to attack some of this stuff. But there will be a password cracking video on Linux as well when we get into the post-exploitation phase of this. But that's really it for now. So we've got the shadow. We could take this offline, try to crack it. We can enumerate files. We can try to, break into user folders and see what they've got in there. Maybe they've got password files stored in there, etc. So from here, we have rooted this machine twice. We've rooted it with Metasploit, we rooted it manually, and now we can start moving on. I do want to show you a few more attacks. So here's what's going to happen over the next few videos. We're going to talk about brute force attacks really quick on SSH. We're going to talk about credential stuffing. We're going to revisit that concept that we talked about in information gathering. And then we're going to look at our notes. And we're just going to compare notes and see where we're at with findings and everything else. After that, we're going to get into what I like to call the mid-course capstone, which is going to allow us to do a bunch of exploitation against a bunch of machines, and it should be really fun. So end of spiel again. I will catch you over in the next video as we talk about brute force attacks. In a previous video, we discussed SSH and that it's really not always that much of a low-hanging fruit. So we've got SSH here, and say we want to attack it. Now there are three reasons we're going to do this. And this is from a realistic perspective. If we see SSH on an assessment, we're going to try to brute force against it or use weak or default credentials. And we're going to do that because 1, we're going to test password strength. 2, we're going to see if we can get in with a weak password or default password. And if we can, that also attests to password strength, correct? And 3, we're going to see how well the blue team performs. Do they catch us? Do they see us brute forcing? This should be something that should alert when it is being performed, but you would be surprised how often it does not. So during a pen test, I am as loud as possible. This is not a red team assessment where we're trying to be quiet. This is a pen test where we are as loud as possible and we are hoping to be caught sometimes, just told to tone it down a little bit. You know, hey, we're seeing you. Can you be more quiet? And we just want to be caught sometimes so we can give kudos in a report and say, hey, you saw us scanning here and kudos to you, but you didn't see us scanning here and here. So this is how we really help fine tune a blue team and help fine tune a client as well, is being loud sometimes. So we're going to practice being loud today, and we're also going to practice brute force attacks. And we have the perfect opportunity to do that with an SSH port being open on this machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called Hydra, and then I'll show you the Metasploit way as well. So Hydra is a brute force tool. So the syntax for Hydra is going to be this. We're going to say Hydra, and then we're going to give a -L for the user that we're going to be utilizing. In this case, I want to attack root. And then we're going to give a capital P for the password list. So if we wanted to use a password list with L, we can just say capital L. But here we're going to say capital P for the password list. And then we're just going to say user share wordless Metasploit. And I'm just going to double tab in this folder so you can see how many words are actually in here. There's quite a bit of wordless, and you can space, and it has wordless for all different kinds of things built in, and these are all over Kali, so it's good to know your folder locations, but user share wordless is one that we'll use quite a bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to utilize an attack with these Unix passwords here. So we have a Unix users and Unix passwords. We're going to utilize the Unix password list and just try to brute force with that. So we'll say Unix passwords, something like that. And then we're going to need to specify what we're attacking. So we are attacking SSH like this, and our IP address of our machine that we're attacking on port 22. And then we need to have a certain amount of attempts or threads at once, and we're going to limit that to 4. And then I'm going to do a capital V for verbosity, just because I want to see the user attempts flow through so that we can actually see what's going on here. So once you got the syntax ready to go ahead and hit enter. And you're going to see that it's starting to attempt root login password with all these weak passwords here. And hopefully it might find something. But let's go ahead and open up a new terminal here. And we're going to just make this a little bigger, and I'm going to load up Metasploit as well. And we're going to run the same exact thing in Metasploit, but I think it's good to know multiple frameworks and multiple tools to perform the same task. So here we're going to search for something like SSH, and this is going to be an auxiliary module, so we'll just scroll up, and we're going to look for something like SSH login. Perfect. Login check scanner. And make sure we don't have anything else, and that looks good to me. So let's go ahead and take this SSH login, and we're going to go ahead and say use options, and now we have kind of our brute force options here. Let me make this a little bigger so it's prettier. So we've got a brute force speed from 0 to 5, 5 being the fastest. Try blank passwords, no. We can set a hard password, and we could set a hard username. We could set a user and password file, a user user as password file, again, we can have a password file as well. So we have a lot of different options here that we can utilize. But we're going to go ahead and do the same kind of thing. We're going to say set username, and we're just going to say root. And then we're going to say set pass file. And similar to what we just used, we're going to say user share wordless Metasploit. And then we're going to say Unix passwords. And that should set the pass file. And then we just need an rhost as well. Set rhost, and we'll say 192.168.57.134. Say our options one more time. And you can see that we've got our password file set. We've got our rhost set. We've got our rport on 22. Threads is 1. Username root. And we should be good to go. Now we could set multiple threads here. We could set threads to like 10. This is really going to amp it up. I mean, this should be detected in a second, but we're going to try to run it. And we could set, actually, let me control C. Let's set verbose to true as well, just so you could see that it's actually working. Set verbose to true, and then we're going to run this. And then it's going to attempt different credentials here, and it'll say, hey, I found it, and it'll light up green, and then we'll know it's good. So this is actually going kind of slow, surprisingly. And you can see here that we are at attempt 112, 116. So this is also going slow. And we do not have a successful attempt or login. I actually don't believe that there's going to be one, but you never know. I believe I remember taking this offline and trying to crack the password, and it wasn't any kind of weak password. So you can let your brute force run if you want to go with it, but I'm going to go ahead and kill mine. And that's it for this video. So from here, we're going to talk about a similar methodology called credential stuffing, which we've already talked about before, except we're not brute forcing, but we're using common knowledge to our advantage. So we'll talk about a little bit of credential stuffing in the next video. Let's talk again about credential stuffing, and while we're at it, we're going to talk about password spraying. Now, I realize we talked about this earlier in the course with breach parse and WeLeakInfo, but I do think that hammering concepts over and over and how important they are does help for information retention. So again, if we look at this example here, what is credential stuffing? Well, it's just injecting breached account credentials in hopes of account takeover. So if you look at the compromised server here in the upper right-hand corner, we pull down usernames and credentials. And we get these from leaks like the LinkedIn link or the Equifax link or whatever of those have come out recently. We get these leaked credentials. And we grab these databases, we search through them like we did with breach parse or like we can with WeLeakInfo, and we get these stolen credentials. And we take these credentials and we try to pass them to the site login. Now, we could take a look at a real life example of that, which I have pulled up here. And again, this is just an example of the Tesla breach parse. So we have some usernames and passwords. We have repeat offenders, remember? We also have similar passwords here. But the art of credential stuffing is taking these passwords and these usernames and throwing them at a website. That's all it is. So we're going to throw them at a website and just kind of spray and pray. Now, I just gone ahead and opened up this same Tesla-master. I've only opened up the users and the passwords just for an example of spraying. This video is going to be in theory only. I don't want you attacking Tesla's website. So just take this for example. You can follow all the way up until the point that we actually hit attack if you want to follow along. But for this, please do not attempt an exploit against Tesla. You do not know when the criteria is going to change, and I just don't want you getting in trouble just in case it does. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and go to Firefox. And while we are in Firefox, what I want to do is I want to take a quick pit stop and go to Google. And I want to look up something called Foxy Proxy. So go ahead and do this. Look up Foxy Proxy like this, not Froxy, Foxy Proxy. And go ahead and click on this top one here, the standard. And we're just going to go ahead and install the standard to our Firefox. And this is going to be a useful tool that we'll be using throughout the course. So, okay, we've got Foxy Proxy installed. Now what has happened up in the right-hand corner, we've got this here. You can see Foxy Proxies here, and we can just say, hey, options. And in the options, we're going to add in a proxy over here on the left. And we're just going to call it Burp Suite. And then over here, we've got proxy types. We're just going to leave this at HTTP. And then we're going to give it an address, which is 127.0.0.1. Same thing as before. And again, this is 8080. We'll just hit save. And then we're going to go ahead and close out. And then all we got to do now is click this and click this. And now Burp Suite's turned on. Super simple. So let's go ahead also to our applications. And let's just go up here and open up Burp Suite. And let's test out our proxy and make sure. Ignore the errors. Don't worry about those. We'll just go ahead and hit next and use burp defaults. And I will give you a second here to catch up because I realize that I might be clicking through a little fast. So once you have everything set up like this, what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure our proxy works. So I'm just going to refresh the page and you can see that it worked. So easy on, easy off. That's all we're looking for here. Instead of having to go in the menu and go to preferences and, go through that whole process, all we got to do is click a little button. We can turn it on or off within a couple clicks. So from here, I'm going to turn the intercept off. And we're just going to go ahead and go to tesla.com. And Tesla should look like this when you go to it. In the upper right-hand corner, there is a sign in button. Go ahead and click sign in. And again, this is just a watch and learn exercise. You can follow along up until the point that we fire the attack. There will be opportunities here in very, very soon videos where you actually get to do this and you can practice along. So from here, let's turn on the intercept and let's go ahead and just put a fake email. We'll just do test@test.com and we'll do test as the password and hit sign in. And that intercepts here. So you can see the user equals, or email equals test@test.com and password equals test. We're going to go ahead and just right click this and say send to intruder. And from intruder, what we're going to do is we're going to go to positions in here and then we're going to clear it. All those green go away because it tries to auto select positions for us. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to highlight this here and we're going to say add. And then we're going to highlight this here, and we're going to say add. So we're selecting two different parameters. We're selecting the email parameter, and we're selecting the password parameter. And now we have different attack types up here. The most common that we're going to use is either Sniper, but Sniper uses one parameter. So we're actually going to use what is called a pitchfork here. And we're going to go ahead and go over to our payloads. And what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to take this list of users and I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it. And then on the second one, I'm going to take my list of passwords and I'm going to paste it. Now, what this is doing, if we go back, payload set 1 is all the usernames. It's going into the first one we set here. Payload set 2, all the passwords. Those are all going into here. And we have 30 total counts, meaning what's happening with this pitchfork is payload 1, number 1, is corresponding to payload 2, number 1. So they only run together. So this will run the username and password. These are just the separated users and passwords. This will run this username against this password here. So what we're going to do is just we start an attack and it just says, hey, this is a demo version of Intruder because you're on community. Don't worry about that. It still runs. It's just a little slower. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause on the attack. Now, there are some interesting things that we can look for. When we're doing this, what we're looking for is a status code change of some sort. Maybe we see 200s here and we want like a 301, which means a redirect. Or we see a significant change in length. That would be a good indicator that maybe we had a successful login. Other items too is that we can click in here and look at the response, and we can say, okay, what did the response say? And if we scroll down, maybe it said something in here about failed login. Okay, we could not sign you in. And we could just take we could not sign you in like this, copy this, and then we can come back. We'll close this attack. We'll come into options here, and there's actually a grep feature. So we can clear all these in this little box, and we can just paste this and say, yes, match this here. So watch what this does. So we're gonna start this attack again, and then I'm gonna pause it. And you can know immediately, look at the checkboxes. This means it's showing up in the response, it's grepping it out, it knows immediately that we didn't sign in successfully. So this is an example of a credential stuffing attack. So we're looking for these few different things, a status change, a significant length. Like we're seeing all the same kind of lengths here, but what if it was like 5,000 or 2,000 or 15,000? If the page length changes, there's a good chance that you signed into something and we have a successful login. Same thing here with this. If you can find your error code or what it says and then grep on that, then you can click up here and just sort by that. And you can search for the ones that don't return that and possibly have a login as well. So this is the art of credential stuffing. Now, let's say we wanted to close this out. We want to go back and we want to do password spraying. Well, we're going to go ahead and just clear this out. And if you remember, password spraying is the art of using known usernames without a known password. So we'll just say add here, and we would gather a list of all the possible users that we can think of. We can look at hunter.io, we can look at the breach password list, we can look at LinkedIn and gather people who work there, come up with this big list, and then actually clear, sorry. No, this is right. We'll add these and we'll have all the different users. And then for this, we'll just change the request to like fall of 2019. Or we can set it up to, we could set this up here like fall 2019 exclamation, or whatever the time frame is, or however you want. Or maybe, they work at Tesla, so maybe we'll do Tesla 1 if they have a weak password policy, or 123, or @ or pound. You just try a few of these. The only downside to this is you are most likely attacking Active Directory accounts. When you're attacking Active Directory accounts, you want to be very careful because you could lock them out without even trying. So if you're doing a pen test, the best idea is to ask before you attack, say, hey, how many attempts do you have unsuccessfully before a logout happens or a lockout happens? Because the worst thing you want to do is fire off 10 of these in a row, lock out a bunch of users, and cause a denial of service. That is very, very possible and very, very easy to do. So make sure you're not just firing these willy-nilly, that you have a good idea of the password policy, the lockout policy, etc. That'll really help you when you do these attacks. But you just want to do these kind of 1 or 2 at a time, wait a few hours, fire another 1 or 2 at a time, and you should be good to go. Okay, so same deal here. We could fire this and we could just say, I'll just say password 123, and we'll just switch this to sniper here. And if we come to the payloads, you can see it just kept the emails. There is no payload 2 anymore. So what this would do if we hit start attack is it would start firing this against this email address with a password of 123. And then this one with this email address with the password of 123. It would just go down the list. And that's all password spraying is. But the feature that I'm showing you here between credential stuffing and password spraying is by far the most common way that we get in on external assessments. Way, way more than you're ever going to see just an exploit out in the wild, where you're going to see this most likely. And second, you're probably going to see something like default credentials. So if you see a login page, always check default credentials because you never know. You're likely not going to see an exploit out there because the chances are, one, is that if you see an exploit like that out there, who knows who else has seen that already? What kind of bad actors? Because bad actors are scanning the internet all the time for these sorts of things. And if they're seeing it, then guess what? Or if you're seeing it, then guess what? They're probably have already seen it as well. So that's a bad situation. 2, you got to think of protection, and clients, just think of clients like a house. when you talk about the external of your house, your external, your doors have really good locks on them. You might have 2 locks on your door. You might have good lighting, all this other stuff, right? Like to try to keep bad guys out. But on the inside, some of your doors probably don't even lock. And that's really how you can treat an external assessment. The clients do a really good job of, buffing up their external. But when it comes to the internal, it's not usually as good. So same thing with physical assessments as well. You gotta get inside. Once you're inside, it's kind of easy breezy for the most part. So take that lesson away. If anything you take from the course, again, at least for the external side, take away that enumeration and information gathering is super important, because you want to get to this stage here where you are doing these credential stuffing attacks, and you can use Burp Suite for it. This is my favorite go-to. There's other methods as well, but it's so easy just to grab any different website and just, intercept the proxy, send it to an intruder, make one modification, and fire it off. So super, super simple. This is something you will come up in an interview as well, so make sure you're very aware of it, and make sure you watch this again if you need to understand the concepts. So from here, we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at our notes in the next video, just kind of where I want you to be with your notes. And then we're going to get into what I call that mid-course capstone, where I'm going to show you a bunch of different hacks and just my thought process and theories and thinking when I go into a scan and looking at results, and just so you can kind of get into the mind of an attacker and how we think. And then we'll start moving on to exploit development and my favorite, the Active Directory exploitation. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video.